So guys, we're going to learn the basic of cloud computing hijacking. So in this cloud computing hijacking part, we're going to learn all of that you need to know. So, but first we're going to learn the cloud computing architecture. After that, we're going to learn the understanding of IIS, PaaS and SaaS. Then we're going to learn the data sovereignty, and then at the end of this basic part we're going to learn that the shadow IT. So after that we're going to learn about the part of hacking through the cloud computing. So in this hacking part we're going to learn firstly about the basics, then hypervisor breakouts. After that we're going to learn about the malicious code users. Then we're going to learn how service like hijacking uses via the social engineering. Then we're going to learn about the economic denial of sustainability, which is EDOS. And then after that, at the end, we're going to learn about the compromising the victim, how we compromise the victim. And after that, at the end, we're going to learn about the real world example of hacking through the cloud computing with a demonstration, and how we use that, or how to use that, and how we can use hacking with cloud computing. And so we're going to use a real world example in here. There is a good chance you have worked with organization with room just like you see here. You may have actually been in this person, this guy or girl who is the administrator that manages the data center. They may be the one of the many administrators, but either way, the traditional model that we have is that there would be the racks and racks of servers sitting on a premise and managed by the professionals whose job is to maintain these data sets. There are complex things to the run. We are looking at a good dedicated hardware here, very specific requirements around things like cooling and fire retardants, and due to the nature of how expensive the equipment in a data center is, this is nothing really changed very quickly to. So you need to new service, and that was a process that some of more months to fill out forms, wait for delivery, and then go through installations process on premise data centers with far from agile, and we are having a cost effective to run the cloud. It start to move us away from exclusive reliability on data centers like this. And during this module, or during this, I'll talk about and explain and what I mean by exclusive at all. And it starts to move us to data centers more like this. This is the Google's I/O data center, and it's just enormous, big. Now, of course, you expect a data center to be this big. They have a massive computing requirement, and just for a census scale. So have a look at how large some of the vehicles are toward the bottom left, and towards the other side you see a parking lot between the two buildings, and this thing is just huge. Now what it means for an organization and a size for Google to build a data center like this is that they can get huge economies of scale. They can start to buy equipment in bulk, spread operational cost across a large number of machines, that automates so many processes of how data centers are run. While this is really expensive endeavor, but the time you break it down, which is actually cost on a per machine basis, certainly what Google is doing here actually starts to look really cheap compared to the on-premise data center in the previous screen that you saw. So let's take a closer look at one of the data centers. So This is what it looks like from the inside one of the Google data center, and no ways it's not dissimilar to the picture that you see in the previous slide with a rows and rack mounted servers, except there are thousands and thousands of them, and it comes to this scale proportion against the organization. The size of Google can stand up is absolutely huge at the data center, and they do have many of them too, and create services that can be very cost effective to run. And because the management of this data center is now such an automated process, they are honestly agile and in their ability to scale up as well. So we'll talk about what we refer as elasticity as we go through this. So let's have a look at the another picture. This is one of the Microsoft Azure data center, and we are looking at here a very modular implementation, all built out as a shipping container. Now imagine each of them shipping container has a rows and rows of rack mounted servers. When they need to expand, they just drop another shipping containers in, and in fact for that matter when they want to stand up the data center somewhere, they can just take this and shipping containers and drop them in places. They've got all the right cooling and fire retardants and everything like that built into them, and they won't have any turnkey data center, except then you have a large number of these shipping crates in order to create data sensors with a very large capacity. So I am showing one of these pictures to try and move us away from the mentality of a data center. So being a very rigid fixed unit within a organization premise to what we now recognize in cloud as being large, very highly agile data center which you can rent a piece of, and really what the cloud is a unit of computing that you can rent on a time basis. So we'll talk about those definition in a moment. So let me show you one more thing. First, this is an experimental prototype which Microsoft has been working on to put the cloud server to the sea. Now, why would they do that? Well, one of the biggest expenses to the organization have been running data center is temperature, and temperature control or cooling a data center is very expensive exercise. So Microsoft have actually been looking at it, and how might a data center running under the sea to be able to better to control the temperature down and keep that really expensive component of operating a data center down to as low as possible. But here's the thing, the consumers who use any of these cloud services, it doesn't really matter to them. They don't really care whether it's land or under the sea, because when we talk about the cloud computing, we are talking about delivering a service for a cost. The physical location doesn't matter, at least not within the certain geopolitical constraints, and we are going to talk about those the next module when we touch an organization security consideration. But for all intent and purposes, whether it's on the land or the next door under the sea, it doesn't really particularly matter, because when you rent server you will never see them and you will never touch them. You don't go and visit your servers in the cloud, you simply pay the services. So there is a quick intro to hopefully get you thinking about how we are changing from a on-premise to cloud-based computing. So this is the NIST cloud computing reference architecture. This is another resources from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and the whole point of having a reference architecture is to have a template for how NIST believes people should build out the cloud. Now this is quite a formal definition of a cloud, but it's a worthwhile understanding because NIST does tend to be a pretty canonical resources for describing how things like this cloud should actually work. So let's kind of have a look at it and go. Here it is, the reference architecture. Here is the niched view cloud, and we're going to touch on 5 key elements in here on the diagram. So the first one is the cloud consumer, and inevitably in this case they are talking about who is actually consuming these services. So which person or organization is actually using the cloud. Next up to the cloud provider, and obviously there is where the bulk of their definition goes. Now this is an evidently the organization providing the cloud services, and you can see within here we have got those services label definitions. Now this is an evidently the organization providing the cloud services, and from the services layers we just look at IaaS, PaaS and SSS, as well as underlying physical resource layer and how the services are actually extracted away from it. So we have got cloud service management, security and privacy, and we are particularly talk about those last 2 points as we progress through it. Next up is the cloud auditor, and what we need to be talking about there is the party who takes independent assessment of this cloud service. This actually defines the order as being a party that can perform an independent examination of the cloud service control. Now what they are talking about here is verifying conformances of standards, and inevitably any major cloud provider is going to have an order to that cloud perform that task of organizations, which put a huge amount of trust in the cloud. So conforming to this cloud reference architecture in terms of actually having someone order things like security, privacy and performance is pretty essential. So when offering a cloud service, next up is the cloud broker. And now we are talking about the entity which manages the relationship between the cloud providers and the consumers of that cloud. They take care of the things like service intermediation, service aggregation and service arbitrage. This starts to become a bit of academic definition of how the cloud service should work. But again, just given a role of NIST and how important these reference architectures are, it is important to at least touch on it. So during this, finally, there is a cloud carrier at the very bottom. So we are now talking about the intermediary who actually provide the connectivity and transport service between the cloud consumers and providers. So telcos for example are pretty important cloud carrier. So there's this cloud computing reference architecture, and there's the last we are going to talk about NIST. And I want to go and talk about just one more thing before we start touching on security and what the promising of the cloud. So what do organization hope to gain from the moving to the cloud? I will talk about it later. In this lecture, I am going to refer to NIST a few times. So I wanted to find it first. The NIST is the National Institute of Standard and Technology, and they are classified as a measurements and standard laboratory. They have been around since the very early 1990s, and this takes responsibility for everything from controlling the things like weights and measures. So how much is a kilogram? How long is an inch all the way through a definition of a bunch of different technologies, standards, things like encryption. And also, what cloud is this PDF? The next definition of a cloud computing is often used as a canonical resource for describing precisely. And what cloud is? It's a very short document. So it was created in 2011 and it talks about 5 specific cloud characteristics. So these are first characteristics that next talk about on-demand self-service. Now what this saying here is that consumer should have a ability to provision things like server time on network storage as needed, and not only as needed but to do automatically and without requiring human interaction. This way we see that manifest itself in modern cloud. Computing is the thing that you go to the cloud provider's portal and you say, I would like to a server, or I would like a storage, or I would like a service. So you click some buttons and it automatically provisioned. It may take a few minutes, but there is no human in the other end or plugging in servers or provisional virtual machines. So it happens on the mind and via the self-service. The next characteristic is broad network access, and that's what Nesters talk about when here is the capabilities of the cloud and that are available over the network, and you can access them via the standard mechanism such as by the browser or by the mobile app. I can go into a portal such as Amazon's AWS over the internet in my browser and then provide those on-demand self-service resources pooling, and this is a really key characteristics of the cloud in these days. By in that on-premise model, you may have to have a server which does a thing. For example, this is the finance server and it services the finance department and it does purely finance thing. Nobody else uses its resources or any other way. So when we talk about the resource pooling, we are talking about a cloud provider having a physical resources which are used by multiple consumers. You will see often this referred as a multi-tenant model. Now those tenants may all get their own logical units of the piece of a physical machine, but it is the one that underlying physical piece of paper or hardware may be divided up and allocated dynamically to a different consumers, therefore pooling that one resource across different tenants. So you don't usually know as a tenant which other tenants are using that same underlying physical instruction and indeed which cloud is done. So you don't care because you are not paying for the physical infrastructure, you are paying for the logical service and it is delivering it to you. So this is really the key characteristics of a cloud. And it is one of the things that makes good cloud implementation so successful, because they can pool resources which then gives the ability to do things like the rapid elasticity. When there is this underlying resources pool and a client comes along and says, yes, I would like more resources now, then that can be provided by the cloud services. Elasticity talks about the ability to either provision more resources or go to the other way of release resources, so that cloud can give and take contact and response to how much the consumer need it. Now that's important because we think back on the premise model, you would have the server and you would pay the server no matter how much of it you use the cloud. So you provision or release what you need, or it may be don't need such, you aren't under provision yet, so you are also not paying for excessive resources, which being as the final characteristics measure services, because the amount you are using can actually be measured, then you can be charged accordingly. So I often use the cloud services in a way where I say, hey, I am to do about something where I actually require a lot more, say I would say database power. So I'm going to scale up my database, and I'm going to actually pay 5 times more during this period where I need the extra computing power, and I can do that because I have rapidly in my cloud service, and I'm going to pay it for the write up until the points. And write decisions to release those resources, and then that rapidly will let me contract, and the amount I will pay will go back down the characteristics of a measured service that can apply to everything from the amount of computing power using to storage through the bandwidth, and certainly different service is different, and cloud provider different cloud provider service will measure differently, but the one common characteristic they have is, according to this definition, is that what you pay, that will depend on how much you use. These 5 characteristics are absolutely fundamental to those way the cloud runs. So the next thing we'll look through is extremely important to understand the infrastructure, platform and software as service that they are going to look. So you very often see these 3 definitions as a cloud service: use IaaS, PaaS and SaaS, infrastructure, platform and software as a service, and I wanted to define each one of these 3. So throughout this, and I'm going to give you a number of different Azure examples, but I'm going to make sure that I talk about the cloud as much as generic terms, because whether it's a Microsoft or Amazon or Xspace or whoever's, these principles always same. So let me show you how to define this in 3 models. So, and in fact we will start by looking at the very old way to doing things, like the on-premise model. So let's think about everything that you actually have to manage in an on-premise data center. Everything from the networking through the storage, obviously the server themselves, if you are using any virtualization, and then the operating system, the middleware things like the web server, the database server, runtime, data application and all the software which then actually runs on the underlying infrastructure, and all of it is your responsibility, you as organization running this on a premise data, and the center that is responsible for the whole lot. And let's start moving across this spectrum of a cloud models, and we will start with IaaS, infrastructure as a service. So now when you have a model and you only manage everything from the OS up, in the case of Azure, Microsoft Manager and everything beneath that, and again it doesn't matter whether it's a Zero or AWS or any of the other providers, the point is that in infrastructure as a service model that provides is doing the networking, the storage, the server, the virtualization, and you then get the logical bits, and that's it on the top of that. Now in some way, as a consumer of the service, this may not be actually look a bit different to when it's an on-premise data center. You still remote into machine and you have the operating system level control, so you can figure your middleware in your runtime and you deploy your apps, but what fundamentally changes is that there is no one left in the organization. So the consuming this service who can go and plug things into the server and change any physical configurations like blinking lights on a machine. None of those things are possible because now the cloud provider is responsible for them. Now for some people they look it as a loss of control, yet on the other hand this is also a loss of responsibility, which means that someone else is taking care it for you. And as we progress through the course or through this lecture, the rest of the course will talk about more pros and cons about it. So for now though, let's move on the next model, and that's PaaS platform as a service, and it goes even further than IaaS because what's happening in a PaaS model is that the cloud provider is giving you, for an example, web hosting, where you have the ability to publish a web application, say, onto the IaaS server. So as you get into the VR, you won't have the ability to interact directly with the things like the OS operating system, and you cannot install service packs and patches. So that is the cloud provides the responsibility. Same with the middleware. If it is the IaaS, you won't have the ability to interact, and with that you would middleware that's the running on all the infrastructure. As a service, you may still have the configurability by virtue of a application you deploy, or perhaps by virtue of their management portals. But as with IaaS, when I talk about the networking through virtualization, this is the something which not only do you longer access to, but you do no longer have the absolute responsibility for. That can be really good thing when it comes to the unburdening organization of this skill and resources required to manage the device and manage the services. So let's go all the way right through the SS. So once we get into the software as a service, there is really nothing left to manage. So think about the sort of software as a service that we might use on a very regular basis. So Salesforce Stop Claim is a canonical example of a software as a service. Not only you not managing any of the network or storage your server, you are not managing any of the middleware or a runtime either. You are not even managing the application. So not in the context of actual writing code, you are configuring the service such that it can be tailored to your organization. The cloud providers, again, such as Salesforce.com, is taking care of everything for you as you go through this paradigm from left to right. And as you can see them in the screen, the cloud providers takes more and more responsibility if you have less and less manage, and you get further and further away from the traditional model. So we refer back at the IaaS path and says we move through the lecture now, and let's move on something different. Let's start with the definition and in very simple terms. And in these simple terms, we are just talking about where the data exists, what country or possibly jurisdiction does that data residing. Now this is an important question because very often when we think about the cloud, we don't necessarily give a lot of thoughts to where the data actually exists. It just goes up into this great big, which is a highly elastic scalable cloud, and you put data in there and you pull data back to you, and you never already see the machine or have any sorts of direct physical connection with them. Now one area where you may consider location is in performance. You like to try and put the service as close as physically possible to the consumers so that you can reduce the latency. But with regards to the data sovereignty, we are actually more worried about things like whose laws apply to the data, and is it even legal to put the data in a particular country. And that's where things get a lot of lot more complex. So I'm going to go and touch on some of the basic implications of where the data actually goes and physically resides at the moment. So first of all, let me give you a quick example of what I mean by the geographic distribution of a cloud. So this is the Microsoft Azure's status page, and all of the first things you will notice here is the map. As you can see in this page here, there is a lot as here the data centers spread across the globe, and in fact if we scroll down and see the service fabric and all organization building applications that they want to put in an user data center, and certainly many other big cloud providers offer many different geolocation where you can put applications, but organizations can consider using a service like Azure need to choose whether the data you want is physically located, but it's not just a data that drives the decision. Part of it is based on what services are available where. So for example, if we look at the service as service fabric as here, it's not available in many different locations. So for example, if you want to put your data in Canada, you wouldn't able to access the service fabric to get it from the asteroid US. So you couldn't even get in Australia, but you cannot get in Canada. Can get in West India or South India or Central India or any bunch of other places either. So cloud providers don't necessarily have a service that in every single one of the data centers. So there is the effect that influence where you are going to put the data, and that's the decision based where the service do or do not exist. So let's go back and look some of the issues which are a little bit more complex in. So in 2013 we saw the Edward Snowden leaks tubs and troves of documents out of the NSA, and many of these documents pointed to very aggressive and in some cases even a legal oversight by the US government. Now this started to make things very difficult on cloud providers because we saw the headlines like this. So I think that what this means is consumers of cloud services, and many of which come to and from US based, and companies are concerned that a foreign government may be able to access their data. This is why sovereignty is important, particularly in a region such as the Eastern Europe, whether you have got some pretty strict laws on privacy or how data is handled. They are understandably very worried about putting their data within the borders of a government that are demonstrated such broad access to such a huge range of personal information. Now this is the issue that really started to drive discussion about data sovereignty, and in fact as you see in the headline, it was becoming so important to business that many of them favored the importance of a control that they could retain over the data instead of the performance of the service itself. And as for the headlines says here, where does this leave the US cloud market? And well, for one, it started to change the discussion about where we should have services, and we should things like suddenly the location of cloud services was becoming a really important. And again, particularly when we talk about the Europe, we saw the emergence of service based of European soil because the data sovereignty issue suddenly became enormously important. So now we understand some of the issues that people concerned about with regards to data sovereignty, and having just look at how Microsoft spread some of their issue data centers around the world. So let me again jump over to the internet and go to the Azure space of the region. Interestingly, this page talks about where you can get access to Azure data centers, and if we scroll down a little bit, we will see a bunch of those locations listed here. And here's what's interesting is that as we scroll down toward this, and you start to get a bit appreciation about how the physical location of this cloud service does actually have some implications. So for example, if you want to use your cloud in Australia, you cannot be you have to have a customer with a business presence down here or in New Zealand. So it cannot be a US-based organization without any presence in Australia and put your service in our cloud. So there probably wouldn't be much point either if you are putting it a long way away from where your customers most likely are. But the point here is that we do have this geographical restriction, as Microsoft Azure is now also available in China, but there are some restriction about who can use this service. But there is this last one is particularly interesting, and that's the case of Germany. And in fact, what Germany has is a data and trustee model, and the customer data remains in Germany under the control of T-System or some telecom company. And the express objective of this is to ensure that the other nations such as the US, which is obviously where Microsoft is based, cannot access the data system control. So it's their data trustee that Microsoft talk about here, and Microsoft and other big clouds providers are very aware about the trust issue of the data being hosted in cloud services which perhaps don't originate from the same country or region where the consumers are. So in fact, these providers are now going to a great length to demonstrate their independence of government control in their countries. Let me give you an example. So this particular case here, which is becoming known as the Microsoft Ireland case, is a really important precedent of how the data hosted with a cloud provider in one country, and which one country should not be able to be accessed by the legal system of that provider's home country. So in this situation here, we have a case where there is a New York District Court judge who asked Microsoft to provide the emails that are stored in their data center in Ireland. So Microsoft was happy to give the court data, which was based in the US, within the jurisdiction of this court, but they refused to hand over any information that was based outside that jurisdiction. So this database in Dublin in the Irish data center. Now this may only be a case of the one individual or some emails, but it's an enormous important percent, and it's not just an important for Microsoft, but it also important for other cloud providers and indeed consumers of these cloud services, because it's demonstrating that the data sovereignty in terms of where their data actually resides is much more important than the nationality of the company. So providing the cloud service, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, everyone wants to be able to show that if someone in Europe puts data in their data center in Europe, then it will be protected under the European law and not made accessible at within the jaws of a foreign country data. And 70 is a complex topic, so there is all sorts of regulatory consideration. So not just the country it resides in, but things like who actually controls the service, who could actually gain the physical access of them. For example, can you put data in a cloud in your own country? So if the cloud is managed and operated by staff in another country, it is a complex area, and our points are really want to make here in this module is about organizational. So the organizational security consideration is that what the cloud changes from your way in, so you might be able to use the hosting system is that you have to think that not just the data reside, but who also controls it and whose government controls them. So that's a complex yet highly important topic. So let's move on to the commercial consideration. So let's just ask a few things quickly. So here in terms of what are some of the commercial consideration an organization need to have when they considering moving into the cloud, and one of them is what happens if the cloud provider is bought by someone else. What happens if there is a acquisition that may not be able to likely and some of the big cloud players, but what about those smaller to medium size one? If they are acquired by another organization, possibly in organization in different jurisdiction and a different country, what might mean that to the customer of this service? What happens when their pricing structure change in the current climate, and when normally seeing a cloud service decreasing price, which most people are pretty happy about? But what happens if the way of pricing is done changes such as it impacts the consumer? So this is certainly a feasible option, I would say, and in this it's not just a cloud option. So we have also had this risk when we consume any sorts of service, but that elastic nature of a cloud tends to be a little bit more to changing another one, so that you do rely and really need to be conscious of. So in terms of commercial consideration is the risk of locking in the provider. So for example, we are seeing many cloud service which are bespoke implementation to the provider. So bespoke storage implementation or message queue or implementation or other service, which can be fantastic in the context of the provider, but may not be transfer well to another provider if you decide to change it later on. So for an example, because they are occurred all by pricing structure changes, so how much lock in are you going to have the cloud provider that you choose? That's the very important commercial consideration. So inevitably for each specific organization there will be have many other commercial consideration that need to be kept in mind, but these are three the big one that come up with time and time again the discussion when choosing a cloud provider. Now I want to go look at one more things on this. So it's something which is actually quite concerned that many organization, and that's shadow IT. Doing any sort of compliance assessment on any sort of hosting provider is normally not the simple task. Indeed, it can be very difficult paperwork laden process, but when we start talking about how that's done on cloud providers, it starts to become quite complex. Certainly something I went through many times in the corporate environment, and it was never simple. There are always a lot of to and for and ultimately and lot of compromises Well, and in this lecture I want to talk about some of the things that you need to consider when it comes to assessing cloud providers. Let's start with some things, information that can be a bit difficult to get from them. So for example, something is simple as a physical address. I have seen cases where the organization involved would expect that a hosting provider would simply give them the address of where the data center is located. Yet as this organization started to transform into the cloud, I saw reluctance from the cloud providers to provide that information because often it is a part of their security postures not to disclose the physical location. Now this might be something which we could refer to as security tips. So let's just tell them where the data center is, and that might reduce the risk of assigning it. But be that as it may, this is the way of some cloud providers choose to operate, and this is a piece of information that can be difficult to obtain. Certain internal procedures can also be difficult to gather from the cloud provider, and they often don't want to disclose the information for a variety of reasons. Sometimes there is a competitive advantage in their particular processes. Other times they feel that they put some of their defenses at their risk. If they are able to discover how this procedure work, in fact, that's often the time for not wanting to disclose certain security defenses. For example, it's very difficult to understand precisely what sort of distributed denial of service defenses are cloud providers, and it does make sense because where that information to become public, that could be used by an adversary to try and circumvent those controls. Certainly that is the rationale of the cloud providers that don't like to provide this piece of information. Now for organizations doing compliance assessments, this becomes a difficult task because you now need to meet some model. They need to gather enough information to be confident in their choice of cloud provider, yet also not exceed the level of information that the cloud provides and cloud providers themselves are willing to provide. However, cloud providers are usual and happy to provide quite a bit of information about other aspects of their security profile. So let me show you what I mean. Just as cloud providers try to get economic as a scale from having a large rollout of infrastructure, they also often try to kill many birds with one stone by demonstrating the compliance standard and they meet. So for example, in Microsoft case, in their trust center they talk about the number of different standards. So for example, you will see that many of these are regional standard or standard implemented by an individual country, but these other have a very well recognized international standard of requirements. So things like this and PCI, and in fact we have a look at the PCI. So here is the PCI. So we can see that the US compliant with the PCI DSS version 3.1, of which of course governments the way payment cards need to be stored, processed and transmitted on drilling down into the PCI page. We can see quite a bit of information about the compliance and level of achieved, but also it also includes a bit of information here about the actual service for which they have achieved in PCI comp. Now this might looks like quite a big comprehensive set of services, and it is, but it's also not everything. Just putting your things in Microsoft as you are a cloud does not make them peace. I complain not only other certain services but that hasn't achieved that compliances. But of course you can still make an application non-compliant even when it's placed inside a PCI DSS compliant environment, so you can still mess up the compliances. But the point is that even though you may not be able to get all the same answer around compliance assessment from a cloud provider, you are very frequently find quite a robust set of other standards that they have reached, and they are usually very happy to make those documents public too. So let me show you one more thing before we wrap up. And this is the history from down here in Australia in 2011, and this is the history. So it's related to the Aussie hosting provider that was previously known as Distribute IT. So they suffered a really serious attack, which, as the story says here in this article, effectively left the company servers uncoverable, and they lost all their client sites, all the data, all of their backups just gone forever. This clearly had a major impact on Distribute IT. They had to shut down, but it also had a massive impact on those who had chosen to use this cloud provider. This is precise to the reason why organizations want to do the compliance assessment. They want to establish with some degree of confidence that the provider they are putting their data in, so it isn't going to suffer faith at the same as Distribute IT. Now we can never be 100% certain about this. There is no absolute position of security. However, this has become almost the canonical reference for why a process assessment and verification of which cloud data should go into is important. So the compliance assessment, and because of that it starts talking about penetration testing. So let's talk about the shadow ID. So if you don't recognize shadow ID by name, you have probably recognized the symptoms of it. Someone in the accounting department who has an Access database that manages all their books for a certain part of the business. IT had nothing to do with it, but somebody knew a little bit about how to whip up an Access database, and now the organization is become really dependent on it. But it hasn't gone through any of the normal organizational approval processes, so it doesn't have the coding standard or the security patterns or any of the things that are important to building robust and sustainable software. So shadow IT is not a new risk. It's not a new risk specific to the cloud. It's one of that we have had for decades now. But what changes with the cloud is just how easy it is for anyone to turn around and stand up services that run for an organization, but totally circumvent all of those. So, and all of those circumvent that IT controls. So let me give you an example. So this is the digital ocean, and they become really popular in recent times for being very cost effective and very fast. You can get an SSD cloud server up and running in within like even less than a minute, like 55 seconds. Now that's very interesting and exemplifying that cloud characteristics of on-demand self-service. That is what we want out of the cloud, but of course by making it so easily accessible and so fast to spin up, just about anyone can do that. So from the shadow IT perspective, the risk we have now is corners of the organization installing up their own cloud. implementation often without any engagement whatsoever with IT and totally skirting around the organization controls that should clear the way things work, like the cloud is actually stored up. The very thing that makes the cloud so attractive is the same thing that increasing the risk of shadow IT. Let's go and talk about some of the ways that we can manage this better. Here is a few things to think about when it comes to reducing the risk of shadow IT. So first of all, actually understanding which cloud resources already is in the organization. You may find that you already have shadow IT. Go and find out where those pockets of cloud actually exist. So now of course you also want to know who is actually creating them. Remember, the cloud service were not necessarily virtual machine running somewhere in an IaaS sort of model. This could be a SaaS implementation. For example, if someone using SurveyMonkey, perfect example of software as a service, and has actually passed through their appropriate organization protocols, and those protocols controls is just not who's creating these services but who's then using them. So how much of an organization now has a dependency on this service? The difference between a few people in one department and hundreds of people across the organization, which is going to determine how to trying unify these little pockets of clouds into a more cohesive organization strategy. Now you may well find that they are the pockets of organization where cloud exists and it does actually adhere the compliances and security policies. But equally, the ease of standing up these services means you will be able to find corners of the organization where their shadow IT cloud that doesn't adhere. I have seen many cases of shadow IT in the corporate world over many years, and one of those things that always struck me that usually solving an actual business problem. So most of the time shadow IT doesn't pop up without a good reason, and what you are usually find is that there is some discrete business problem. The problem is standing up these services are trying to solve. So what I would encourage you to try and do is, when you see shadow IT is pop up in this fashion, to think about what the underlying problem is. Why is shadow IT is here? Why couldn't they get the service through the formal IT channel of the organization? So in a case like cloud, if someone is going out and getting a virtual server from DigitalOcean, like I saw previously, it only takes 55 seconds. And what can the organization better do to make those machines so more readily accessible within the construct of a formal cloud strategy? Clearly the technology exists. DigitalOcean can do it in 55 seconds. How can you help the person that really genuinely needs a server and quickly get that machine without skirting around and the organization controls? So that's the shadow IT, and indeed that is the organizational security consideration lectures. So let's start here. This is the administration interface for Microsoft Azure cloud platform, and I want to give you just a bit of sense of how important these sort of facilities are. So administration interface like this is normally and publicly facing. Anyone with an internet connection can access it. So let's just take a few minutes to talk about some of the damage that can be done if an attacker can get hold of an administration interface like this one here. So if an attacker get hold of an administrator attacker like this one, so for an example,
they could start to have a look at some of the services that you are running under the My Cloud account services, such as website, or as you call them, app services, in the left hand side bar. As an example, websites such as Hack Yourself Fast is a deliberately vulnerable website that used to demonstrate typical web security risk. As you can see in the left side picture in this slide, it runs up here in Azure, and where an attacker able to compromising my administration facilities. This is what they would able to see in the first picture of this slide, but perhaps more importantly, that be able to see things like my app setting. These are all available via the portal, because as that infrastructure is virtualized and abstracted away into the thing that we know and call the cloud. And in fact, in this particular course, we are looking at a platform as a service implementation of a website, and all the administration facilities are readily accessible in the browser. So for an example, through my application setting, we will be able to see some of the value pairs and actual app services, and very frequently app settings that will be secret in them. However, very often we would be able to looking at things like API keys, credential, other secrets that are meant to remain secret and not be accessible to an attacker. Another good example that is that connection string. This gets you an access to the database. So these are the real connection string of this particular web application that you can see in Azure by default, that has hidden info security reason. But an attacker with access to my administration facility would able to see the connection string and make a connection to the database and extract any data that are into the account in that connection string which has access to, along with accusing things like, as you can see in this previous picture, my app setting and my connection setting. An attacker could access all sorts of other cloud constructs that anyone might be using. So for example, like Azure's storage implementation, blog storage, table storage, message queues, and all sorts of accessibles. When you have the access to the portal, accessing information that I already have in the portal is one particular class of attack, and certainly that is the thing that most people are worried about. But for an attacker, that can do damage by doing something like creating a virtual machine inside this, as you see in the second picture. Now let's say you attack, let's say I am with my attack head on, and JS5 machine sounds about just right. So why is this right? Well, because it's going to cost the person who owns the cloud server over $8,000 a month. This is a different class of malicious altogether. This isn't about taking any data, although certainly if they have access to this portal, then that's one of the things they could do. But this is just about causing the economist duties. We are going to look at something very similar shortly, which is economic denial of sustainability. But one thing of this risk is that which is run with a portal like this, and indeed all the cloud providers do have a public facing portals which is like this in this, and it is exceptionally easy for cost to escalate. We can spend a lot money than just $8,000 a month, very simply. So from a cloud computing risk perspective, a very tangible risk and is that the cost can escalate out of the control anonymously, and which is quickly by using an attacker who goes through and provisions. and provision the machine like this, or even because the individual responsible for managing the resources over the provision, or simply make a mistake and choose the wrong size resources. So we didn't have this problem when we are able to ordering physical infrastructure, having it shipped on the site. So we had many other problems, no doubt about it, but we really didn't have the same problem as someone going in and ordering up. That caused a huge cost of being queued or almost instantly, as their in their pool of administration facilities like these are extremely valuable. And later on this we will be talk about how to harden the cloud. And one of the things that we will be look at is when we make sure that a particular resources is well protected as a composable B. So for now though, let's take a look at some of the few different ways that an attacker might actually gain access to the administration, and let's talk about just some of the things and ways that an attacker can gain access to administration facilities, and of course access private information or run up their costs. So for an example, if someone with access to the administration facilities reuse their credential, those credentials may be compromised from another service, and certainly we see this happen many times, and data breaches that reuse the access of administration facility of the cloud provider. So in a case like this, the username and password to a portal such as Microsoft is literally obtained in the attacker, and that reuse the administration facilities in a case like this, and there is clearly a fault on a behalf of a person who owns the account and take the risk of that account by taking and reuse the credentials. Another possible attack is someone like session hijacking. Now this is a quite a different, because what we are talking about here is and what would happen to boil down a flaw in the administration facility software. So for an example, if they weren't flagging their cookies as SCP only, and they had a reflected cross-site scripting vulnerability, and an attacker was able to convince the victim to follow a link, and that link we could have access of a session hijacking. And we talked about this and previously with likes of ethical hijacking and session hijacking, and that goes through many of the different ways that can happen. The reason why I have included it here is that the demonstrate that the weakness in the administration facility itself, which leads to a compromise. And now this is important because it recognized that those with access to the portal could do anything, and ultimately these portal themselves are just more web software than any typical web vulnerabilities. The different risk again is exposed to keys, and what I would like to do here is actually give you an example of where this happened. Let me talk about in 2015 a web developer accidentally made it to get half respiratory in public. The background is that the Visual Studio 25 behaved in an unexpected fashion when he attempted to create the when he created the repository, but be able to do that as it may, he ended up with the repository going public, and the repository include an AWS case, and that key was very quickly stolen by someone monitoring GitHub for public repositories and used to provision resources that allow the attacker to mine the bitcoins there very quickly. So he saw this bill run up to $6,500 within the hour, which speaks to the previous point I just showed you in terms of how easy it is to provision and very extensive resources of all this possible because of this AWS administration facilities, just like Microsoft Azure and just like so many other cloud provided dashboard sits out there facing the public. It is literally one keys or one set of credential away from an attacker having full control of it, so that the expose the keys. So let's go back and take a look at one more possible cause of administration facility compromise, and the final one is social engineering. So this is another topic I talked about previously, is ethical hijacking or social engineering, and in there I talked about many of the different ways that valuable pieces of information can be extracted from targets, and the contents of gaining access to an administration facility. That target could be the individual whose account and attacks wants access to, but it also could be someone of a support side of the cloud itself. So let's move on, take a better look at the social engineering, because in the context of administration facilities of cloud service, it is a really important topic to be aware of. Let's start with the definition of hypervisor, because it really is a pretty key component of a cloud implementation. The hypervisor is the virtual machine monitor. So this is really the heart of what allows us to run multiple logical machines on top of one piece of physical infrastructure to better understand how the hypervisor works. So let's go take a quick look at the mechanics of virtualization. We have had a virtual machine around for a very long time. In fact, it may well have run them on your own physical machine, and virtualization is a pretty key tenet of the way cloud services run. So of course, there's much more to the cloud than just having virtualization. We still need those cloud characteristics such as on-demand self-services and resource pooling. But when we leverage those characteristics, we are very frequently using virtualization and virtualization service, particularly when we have talk about the infrastructure as a service. So when we look at the virtualization, inevitably we do still have a layer of physical infrastructure back in the first module. So I showed you some of the data centers of Google and Microsoft, and there is still lack of machines that are underlying physical infrastructure. So we have a virtualization layer. So this is what the hypervisor is able to sit there and provide an abstraction between the physical infrastructure and logical infrastructure that sits on top of it. So this is going to be one of the on our virtual machine. So now that logical infrastructure means that when you do remote into into your server, you will still need it to see the network card and hard disk and other virtual devices. They don't necessarily map directly to that underlying physical infrastructure, but it does mean that when you are in there in the machine, it looks pretty much like a normal operating system, because of course that's what we have. The operating system sits on top of the logical infrastructure and it supports the application that run with this. Now when we talk about the virtualization, we inevitably have multiple virtual machines that run on top of the physical infrastructure. Sometimes it can be thousands of machines, and in fact as such as the capacity of the underlying physical infrastructure and the scale of the logical machine that are being provided and will determine how many get provisions and within the one physical machine. The hypervisor is what keeps virtual machine 1 separated from the virtual machine 2, because this could belong to totally different customers, and this is much of a premise of resource pool in that the other cloud characteristics. So we looked at the first module. So we are going to share the physical infrastructure between the multiple customers. But what does if it goes wrong? So what happens if virtual machine owner is able to break out the hypervisor, which is meant to keep it as a self-contained logical piece of infrastructure, and then access the resources from the virtual machine to because it could be catastrophic, because you could end up with one customer accessing to another customer's data, and this is not a hypothetical risk either. So let me show you. In 2015 we saw a very serious risk with a Zen hypervisor, and one of the things that made this risk is so serious that this is what AWS uses most of the customers on Amazon's cloud service as sitting top of the virtual machine and managed by the Zen. With a problem within the particular risk is that provided the potential for an attacker to break out and one of those logical machines sitting top of the Zen supervisor and access extremely sensitive part of the underlying operating system. Now fortunately this was patched very quickly by Zen and rolled out very quickly to customers such as Amazon, but it demonstrated what is probably the biggest fear most organizations have about cloud security is that they are sharing resources with other customers. And indeed this is one of the reasons why models such as a private cloud whatever that beyond premise or with a provider or other often preferable to use the core tenant to the model, which is more easily obtainable and most cost efficient model. So the Zen bug is probably one of the worst we have seen in terms of impact on the hypervisor, and even now the patch was very quickly. It serves as a reminder that there are some unique risks that we run services in the cloud incident such as this post a very specific risk for organizations that are decided to put their resources in the cloud. But there are another class of cloud computing risk that affects everyone regardless of whether they have put their things on the cloud or not. So let's look at the hypervisor breakout, what it means. So everything that breaks the assumption that the virtual machine can be treated like separate virtual machine, and here are some of the ways to protect against it. Keeping your virtual machine network away from your management network is a great way to secure your virtualized environment. If malware compromised your virtual machines, it won't be able to affect your hypervisor. Ideally, only you, your system administrator or virtualization provider should have access to your hypervisor console. So you need to set strict access restriction on the software to prevent unauthorized user from messing with virtual machine setting and viewing your most sensitive data. Disable unnecessary services, which is the off-the-shelf operating system will have many unnecessary services and apps that increase the attack surfaces of your virtual machines, and if you cannot tell which one is to disable, consult with a virtualization specialist. Breaking into a server room is the easiest way to compromise the hypervisor, so make sure your physical servers are behind locked doors and watched over by staff at all the time. Due to the network infestation affecting hypervisor security, Installing cutting-edge firewall and intrusion preventing system is highly recommended. These security tools monitor network traffic for abnormal behavior to protect you from the network and the newest exploits. Hypervisor must be updated to defend them against the latest threat. But if you would rather spend your time on an important project, you can always entrust the security of your hypervisor to a highly experienced and certified managed service provider. Having this on-demand self-service rapidly elastic model that is cloud allows us to do wonderful things that we can do, and the many good things with good honest software that we couldn't do in the past. However, all of those attributes allows evil actors to do some pretty malicious things as well. So for an example, cloud resources are enormously effective at mounting DDoS attack. If you can go in there and spin up as many as resources as you like, as fast as you like, that is enormously useful for flooding a target with malicious traffic. You can spin up a bunch of machine in one go, and you tell them all the target of a particular resources. Now that the claim providers such as Microsoft and Amazon and Google normally put a stop to the sort of thing, when stop it pretty much quickly, but now all cloud providers are quite so vigilant, and indeed it can also take a while to before malicious activity like that is identified and service shut down. For another years again is for password tracking. This is an activity which you can be really research intensive, and the upside of doing this is the cloud that appropriate resources can be provisioned when required, used for the duration and for the cracking process, and then simply discarded and the charges. And then again, this is the joy of having measured service. Let me give you an example of that. In 2015, there was a piece tracking with Wi-Fi WPA2 password thanks to Amazon, and effectively what they have done is just spun up the appropriate resources as required and then gone through the password cracking exercise. So in this case, there is a perfect image already available in AWS and Amazon Linux AMI and NVIDIA Grid GPU power. So this is now using graphical processing unit that are available as a service in the cloud, and then they tend to be enormously effective at cracking certain types of hashes. Now of course, password tracking isn't always used for malicious purpose, but you can certainly see how it would be attractive to attackers. So that wanted to, and the attackers that wanted to use the cloud to break others people's security. So let's go and have a look at another malicious who use button and it command and control in a botnet, botnet CNC and botnet of infected machine, sometimes tens of thousands of different machine. The commanding control server gives the attacker a mechanism to detect the behavior of the bots. Now these CNC servers always the target of law enforcement and security vendors are like this. As an example, if you can take down the CNC efficiently and leave the infected machine, and then it can no longer take commands from anywhere. So part of the joy of the cloud for but harder who's trying to keep their CNC server alive. Now CNC environment, of course, let's just gonna do make sure and that those infected clients know which CNC server to talk to, but The very fact that they can spin up machines so quickly and then spin up them again in different parts of the world with different configuration gives them a whole bunch of different options which they never had before. In this advent of the cloud, one final malicious use for the cloud is CAPTCHA solving. Now this is an exercise which is done by various levels of success depending on the CAPTCHA and depending on the value of solving an individual one of their attacker. This is an exercise that can be quite resource intensive, particularly if it is done at volume. So the promise of the cloud here is the ability to rapidly deploy instance of logical machines or services that can take a board or load involved in tracking CAPTCHA. Now an automated machine solving CAPTCHA for you probably sounds like a pretty nice idea, but keep in mind the CAPTCHA are normally there to try to avoid automation. So this usually there to protect the system from attacks such as brute force. So in attack of being able to solve the CAPTCHA at a higher rate often then puts other legitimate machine at risk. These are all malicious user of the cloud that we have seen before and we will see them again as well. So let's go and take a look at couple of other potential risks within the cloud. So let's start here. And it's a very question that many organizations are asking themselves. What does it mean they cannot control the physical machine? Does it increase the risk? As I have said many times now, I actually don't think this is a good question. It's a very black and white and it's a like a black and white question. Is it more risky or less risky? Because you could ask this question instead. So is it possible that the cloud provider could manage the infrastructure better than what the organization themselves could? That goes back to one of the points that made in the very first lecture where I showed you the use of these Google data centers are and how they are able to commoditize the way these resources are managed to and do in a very professional manner. So again, just saying, is it more or less secure? Is the risk increased or decreased is perhaps not the right question, but let's actually touch on that concern I raised in the last slide. What can possibly happen if you are sharing infrastructure to someone else? We looked at hypervision breakouts earlier on. So let's look at the another risk related to sharing underlying infrastructure in 2015. So when this attack emerges, this has become known as row hammer, and what we are talking about here is a very low level attack that goes all the way down to the way dynamic and random access memory. So memory was also known as DRAM, where could possibly leak charges, and as Wikipedia says, here interact electrically between memory cells and possibly altering the contents of nearby memory rows that were not addressed in the original memory access. The bottom line is that row hammer can potentially change the state of the memory outside and the intended function of the process that's using it, as an article goes on to explain here. We actually saw that used in some of the privilege escalation exploits. Now think about this from the perspective of a cloud, and in fact think back to when I talked about the high providers. Row hammer is an attack against the underlying physical infrastructure, not the logical infrastructure or anything else which is isolated by the hypervisor. This is precisely the sort of things that organizations are worried about when they share the infrastructure with other customers. Now I have included these down here as the end of this lecture. So in other potential risk, simply because of illustrate the fear of sharing that underlying physical infrastructure, there weren't a workable attack that were used to in this cloud environment that allowed one customer to start modifying or accessing another customer's. So certainly none that became publicly documented anyway, but that's the part of the concern. We know that the true potential with many of these experts to keep silent and are used to malicious way that we never know about publicly, while there is a shared underlying physical infrastructure, and this is the sort of concern that opponents of cloud computing will raise. So let's look at one more, and this one is a little bit more hypothetical. In 2016, there is a study done that showed how crypto keys on a machine could be obtained by another machine and another room, and then first machine was air gap as well, so it was not connected to a network at all. Now what the researchers from Tel Aviv University found is that they could measure the targets by electromagnetic emanation, and that alone could possibly extract the crypto keys. This obviously requires some pretty specialized hardware, as you can see in the image that the bottom left here, and it did also require pretty close proximity between the equipment and the target machine, and it was just the other side of the wall, but it was significant that the machine was actually air gapped, and it was a very simple passive observation of how the machine was behaving. Now in fairness, relating this back to cloud computing, it's a very long bow to draw in. So far as what these guys were able to do is having any impact whatsoever on the way she ran the day onto cloud. But look at the problem this way: what many organizations are concerned about this when they no longer have physical control of this infrastructure. They become somewhat I would say xenophobic, and they are afraid of the unknown. Now whereas the raw hammer or specialized electromagnetic gear, looking at the emanation from the machine, this feels ability and these attackers is almost a secondary consideration, because the concern is simply that it's not within their control, and often the belief is that if those machines sit within an organization data center, it attacks like this simply won't happen. But of course there have been many attacks. The gas physical infrastructure that exists within an organization data center, and they might not be able to be the one who are looked in here, but they have been a such more classic style of attack, often attacking from things like malicious insider or actors who is socially engineer themselves onto the organization premise, and the different attacks. And this again speaks the whole premise of a cloud security being defined rather than better or worse. But one thing that does play into the favor of cloud security is that when we look into the cases of Gen hypervisor breakout, and that was a serious bug, it's now become someone else's responsibility. And all of the positive things about cloud security is that when you use a provider the size of Amazon, Google or Microsoft, they have an almost unparalleled ability to identify, patch and deploy defenses against this risk in record time, and that's a really good talking about the consideration in cloud computing or security strings. Now let's go and wrap this up, and we will go and look at the good security aspects of the cloud.
Social engineering is the act of exploiting human weakness to gain access to personal information and protected systems. Social engineering relies on manipulating individuals rather than hacking computer systems to penetrate a target's account. Social engineering refers to manipulation of a target so that they give up key information. In addition to stealing an individual's identity or compromising a credit cards or bank's account, social engineering can be applied to obtain a company's trade secret or exploit national security. Attackers often use the surprisingly simple tactic in social engineering schemes, such as asking people for help. Another tactic is to exploit disaster victims by asking them to provide personally identifiable information such as maiden name, address, date of birth, social security number, missing or deceased loved one. So why? Because this piece of information can later be used to identity theft. Emails can be disguised to appear as a true or originated from the known sender when they are sent from a hacker. More elaborate tactics targeted by specific people might involve learning about their interest and their sending the target link related to their interest. So let's talk about sign of a social engineering attack. Social engineering can happen anywhere, online and offline. And unlike traditional cyber attack, whereby cyber criminals are stealthy and want to go unnoticed, social engineering are often communicating with us to plain sight. Consider these common social engineering tactics that might be right under your nose. Your friend sends you a strange message. Social engineer can pose as trusted individuals in your life, including a friend, boss, co-worker, even a banking institution, and send you a conspicuous or suspicious message containing malicious link or download. Just remember, you know your friend best, and if you send them if they send you something unusual, ask them about it. Your emotions are highlighted. The more irritable we are, the more likely we are going to our guard down. Social engineers are great at stirring up our emotions like fear, excitement, curiosity, anger, guilt, and sadness. In your online interaction, consider the cause of these emotional triggers before acting on them. The request is urgent. Social engineers don't want you to think twice about their tactic. That's why many social engineering attacks involve some types of urgency, such as sweet cakes, and that's how you now new or cybersecurity software you need to download and to wipe a virus off your computer. The offer feels too good to be true. Even ever receive news that you didn't ask for. Even good news like winning a lottery or free course. Chances are like that are often seems to be good to be true. It's just that are potentially social engineering attack. You are received help you didn't ask for. Social engineer might reach out under the guise of a company providing help for a problem that you have a similar to, like tech support scam, and consider you might not be a expert in that line. You might believe they are who that say and they have provided them access to your device or account. The sender cannot prove their identity. If you raise any suspicious with a potential social engineer, they are unable to prove their identity. Perhaps they won't do a video call with you. For instance, chances are like that they are not to be trusted. So here are a couple of the social engineering attack are common in our cyber attack. So almost all cyber attacks have some sort of or some form of social engineering involved. The most social engineering technique also involve malware, meaning malicious software that unwillingly wreak havoc to our daily life.
And first one is like scareware. As the name indicates, scareware is a malware that's sent to scare you to take action and to take action fast. It often comes with the form of pop-ups or email indicating you that act now to get rid of viruses or malware on your device. In fact, if you act, you might be downloading a computer virus or malware onto your system. So let me give you an example of scareware. So in 2019, an officer supplied and tech support company teamed up with a commits scareware act. The office supplier required its employee to run a rigged PC test on customer's device that would encourage customer to purchase unneeded repair service. Ultimately, the Federal Trade Commission ordered the supplier, the tech support company, to pay a 35 million settlement. Email hacking. It is our nature to pay attention to the message that people we know, and social engineering know this all too well. Commandeering email account and spamming contact list with phishing scam and messages. So an example of this is, so if your friend send you an email with the object like check this out, it's really cool, so you might not think twice before opening it by taking over someone's email account. A social engineer can make those into a contact list believing that they have received emails from somewhere they know. The primary objective includes spreading malware and tricking people out of their personal data. Access tailgating, also known as piggybacking. Access tailgating is when a social engineering physically trails or follow unauthorized individuals to an area they do not have access to. They can be as simple as holding an open door for someone else. Once inside, they have full reign to access device containing important information. Phishing. Phishing is a well-known way to grab information from an unwitting victim. How it typically works: a cyber criminal or phisher send a message to a target that asks for some type of information or action that might help with a more significant crime. The ask can be simple as encouraging you to download an attachment or verifying your email address. Worth noting is there are many forms of phishing that social engineering choose from, all with different means of targeting. Spam phishing attack takes a lot of form of big email sweep, not necessarily targeting a single user. Spear phishing target individuals, perhaps an impersonated trusted contact, while target celebrity on a high level executive. DNS spoofing, also known as cache poisoning. DNS spoofing is when a browser is manipulated so that online users are redirected to malicious website bent on stealing sensitive information. In other words, DNS spoof is when your cache is poisoned and with some like malicious redirects. So let me give you an example. In 2018, a cloud computing company and its customer were victim of a DNS spoofing attack that resulted in around 17 million of cryptocurrency being stolen from the victim. Cybercriminal rerouted people trying to log out into their cryptocurrency account to a fake website that gathered their credentials to the cryptocurrency site and ultimately drained their account. Baiting. Baiting is a built-up premise of someone taking the bait, meaning danger or dangling something desirable in front of a victim and hoping that they will bite. This occurs most often to peer-to-peer sites like social media, whereby someone might encourage you to download a video or music just to discover it's infected with malwares. So now, show your device. Physical breaches. As the name indicates, physical breaches are when a cyber criminal is in plain sight, physically posing a legitimate source of stealing confidential data or informing from you, or take the information from you. These might be as colleagues or a IT person. Perhaps they are disgruntled former employee, acting like they are helping you with a format problem on your device. In fact, they could be stealing your account login. pretexting. What is pretexting? Is the use of a interesting pretext or ploy to capture someone's attention. Once the story hooks the person, the social engineer tries to trick the would be victim into providing something of a value. Oftentimes, the social engineer is impersonating a legitimate source. Watering hole attack. A watering hole attack is a one-sweep attack that infects a single web page with malware. The web page is almost always on a very popular site, or a virtual watering hole. So if you will to ensure that malware can reach as many as possible. So let me give you an example because this might be tough to understand. So in 2014, a media site was compromised with a watering hole attack attributed to Chinese cybercriminals. They exploited vulnerabilities on a media site to create a fake widget that, when loaded, infected visitors' browsers with malware. The last one is quid pro quo. So this means a favor for favor, especially. So I give you this, you give me that. In this instance of social engineering, the victim cough up something sensitive information like account logins or payment method, or like your sensitive images from your cloud. So they act like the account or payment method, and then social engineer doesn't return their end of the bargain. So as an example, like a video gaming example, you might be on a video gaming forum and on the lookout of the cheat code to surpass a different level. Perhaps you wire money to someone selling the code just to be never hear from them again and never see your money again, but you already gave the money, so and you cannot take your cheat code or get your money back. So that's called quid pro quo. So that's the all of the types and ways that common cyber attack as a social engineering attack.
So what is EDOS? So EDOS is a economic denial of sustainability. So EDOS is a cyber security threat targeting cloud environment. So EDOS attack exploit that the elasticity of a cloud, that particularly auto-scaling the capabilities, which inflates the building of a cloud user until the account reaches the bankruptcy or large-scale service withdrawal. So EDOS attack exploit the cloud economic of a scale to disrupt or discontinue the ability of a cloud service and the infrastructure that support the application. And also it supports the system and corporate networks. It typically involves remotely controlled bots that covertly send fake requests. So if these requests bypass the security controls, the cloud service provision additional resources and charges the cloud user. So EDOS traffic uses IP spoofing and is difficult to detect using existing network analysis technique unless attackers are using the bad IPs. So the application and the end user are not initially affected by EDOS attack, and cloud resources scale up to meet the additional traffic, at least until the budget is depleted. So the application performance metrics cannot be used to detect the attack. So let's have a look at the what sort of codes that we are talking about. So let's go to our, this is the Microsoft Azure, this is the service, and Microsoft Azure, I am into here the pricing calculator, and it's really a good way of getting a sense of how much it might cost to run a certain service. So we are going to use it to get a sense of how much damage you could cause someone if you could get the service there and using it to scale a way up into the EDOS attack. So for example, if we use the app service, so as you can see, this is the app service. So this is the Microsoft interpretation of a website as a service instance, and that's been added. So let's look at how much it will cost and how much cost we're gonna choose for the standard tier. So let's choose the standard tier, which is pretty typical for the website. So as you can see, this will simply cost $73 a month. So let's go over here and going to add the instance. So instead of one, we might take 2, 3, 4, or maybe 5 instance. So as you can see, now we are talking about the $365 a month. So the question you need to ask in terms of the risk of this DDoS attack is that how could you possibly call someone to run 5 instances of the service instead of one? Well, the surface like 0 will scale out automatically. So if it's configured to do, indeed this is a pretty popular way of setting up a website and set up a auto scale, and then if you have unexpected success through a huge volume or through traffic that coming to your site to get more instance, you have to pay for them, and you have got this on a legitimate traffic, which is a good thing. That what if it wasn't a legitimate traffic? So what if the attacker was manufacturing request to the site of that causes it to scale out, not due to the legitimate traffic, but jittered the specific request that the attacker was sending. So what if instead the site was running on a premium tier? Let's try premium. So this is here too much. Okay, let's try medium, premium version 2. So if the attacker was manufacturing request to the site that caused it to the scale out, not to the legitimate, so premium tier and the auto scale, that will automatically go to higher. So if we use like 20 instance, as you can see, nearly $3,000. So suddenly those costs start to really escalate. So what could possibly cause infrastructure to scale this way? Well, you need to think about what creates the overhead or website. So for example, many web application we use very slow hashing algorithm, which means that every time someone tries to log in, there is actually quite a bit of load at the infrastructure. So if I was an attacker trying to mount an economic denial of sustainability attack or DDoS attack on the victim website, I would be issuing as well as many login requests as I possibly could. That's the sort of thing that is going to drive up the CPU overhead and possibly trigger up the infrastructure to scale out. So let's try something else. We'll go and try to add the bandwidth. So let's go to bandwidth in network and use the bandwidth. So bandwidth is added. As you can see, 5 GB price is totally free. So if you use 500 GB, so it is $24. So we'll go and add some bandwidth that will scale up the price. So let's try 2 terabyte, which is $100. So 200 GB, 2000 GB. Let's try 1 terabyte, which is $499. And obviously we can show much and more terabytes and cost up even be higher depending on the location. So if we use like, let's use where is West US, we use Brazil. So Brazil is the higher prices. So Brazil South, as you can see, it rose up like instantly. So those costs can be even higher. As example, I show you Brazil is actually more than double the cost at the same amount that I previously seen. So if the service is located in Brazil, many cloud service will actually distribute application across the globe. So if you are an attacker that can cause large volume of data with the exist of customer Brazil instance, you're effectively leveraging your impact in terms of economic denial sustainability. But I only actually do this because the attacker doesn't want to be occurring and the same cost themselves. So the reality is, though they usually wouldn't need to, because a pretty normal state even with the charge is with the cloud that provides is going to pay for a data. So that's what we are looking here, but you don't pay for the ingress data. So if the attacker goes and stand up with their own cloud service and then target the victim by creating a script that download the large volume of data from that victim cloud service into the attacker's cloud service, then the victim is seen either as data which has this cost, but the attacker is seen the ingress data which is frequently has no cost. Then they would simply go and identify the resources on the target website that are large and the large image document and maybe movies, and then they download many of them as they possibly could as fast as they could. Now that's a pretty sticking example, and certainly there are ways that the victim could try and protect their asset and from being attacking in this way. But equally there are many different ways for an attacker can cause large volume of data to exit a site or a large number of requests to be sent on a high overhead processes by distributing that loadout in a way, and that's very difficult to defend the guest. Now this isn't a DDoS attack. Sorry, this isn't a distributed denial of service, which is DDoS attack in a classic sense. So they are not necessarily wanting to take the service down. They are just trying to make it expensive to run. So that's the DDoS.
So let's start here. This is the administration interface for Microsoft Azure Cloud Platform, and I want to give you just a bit of sense of how important these sort of facilities are. So administration interface like this is normally and publicly facing anyone with an internet connection can access it. So let's just take a few minutes to talk about some of the damage that can be done if an attacker can get hold of an administration interface like this one here. So if an attacker get hold of an administrator attacker like this one, so for an example, they could start to have a look at the some of the services that you are running under the My Cloud account services, such as website or as you call them app services in the left hand side bar. As an example, websites such as Hack Yourself Fast is a deliberately vulnerable website that used to demonstrate typical web security risk. As you can see in the left side picture in this slide, it runs up here in Azure, and where an attacker able to compromising my administration facilities. This is what they would able to see in the first picture of this slide, but perhaps more importantly that be able to see things like my app setting. These are all available via the portal, because as that infrastructure is virtualized and abstracted away into the thing that we know and call the cloud. And in fact, in this particular cause, we are looking at a platform as a service implementation of a website, and all the administration facilities are readily accessible in the browser. So for an example, through my application setting, we will be able to see some of the value pairs and actual app services, and very frequently app settings that will be secret in them. However, very often we would be able to looking at things like API keys, credential, other secrets that are meant to remain secret and not be accessible to an attacker. Another good example that is that connection string. This gets you an access to the database. So these are the real connection string of this particular web application that you can see in Azure by default, that has hidden info security reason. But an attacker with access to my administration facility would able to see the connection string and make a connection to the database and extract any data that are into the account in that connection string which has access to, along with accusing things like, as you can see in this previous picture, my app setting and my connection setting. An attacker could access all sorts of other cloud constructs that anyone might be using. So for example, like Azure's storage implementation, blog storage, table storage, message queues, and all sorts of accessibles. When you have the access to the portal, accessing information that I already have in the portal is one particular class of attack, and certainly that is the thing that most people are worried about. But for an attacker that can do damage by doing something like creating a virtual machine inside this, as you see in the second picture. Now let's say you attack, let's say I am with my attack head down and JS5 machine sounds about just right. So why is this right? Well, because it's going to cost the person who owns the cloud server over $8,000 a month. This is a different class of malicious altogether. This isn't about taking any data, although certainly if they have access to this portal, then that's one of the things they could do. But this is just about causing the economist duties. We are going to look at something very similar shortly, which is economic denial of sustainability. But one thing of this risk is that which is run with a portal like this, and indeed all the cloud providers do have a public facing portals which is like this in this, and it is exceptionally easy for cost to escalate. We can spend a lot money than just $8,000 a month, very simply. So from a cloud computing risk perspective, a very tangible risk and is that the cost can escalate out of the control anonymously, and which is quickly by using an attacker who goes through and provision the machine like this, or even because the individual responsible for managing the resources over the provision, or simply make a mistake and choose the wrong size resources. So we didn't have this problem when we are able to ordering physical infrastructure, having it shipped on the site. So we had many other problems, no doubt about it, but we really didn't have the same problem as someone going in and ordering up. That caused a huge cost of being queued or almost instantly, as there in their pool of administration facilities like these are extremely valuable. And later on this we will be talk about how to harden the cloud, and one of the things that we will be look at is when we make sure that a particular resources is well protected as a composable be. So for now though, let's take a look at some of the few different ways that an attacker might actually gain access to the administration, and let's talk about just some of the things and ways that an attacker can gain access to administration facilities and of course access private information or run up their costs. So for an example, If someone with access to the administration facilities reuse their credential, those credentials may be compromised from another service, and certainly we see this happen many times, and data breaches that reuse the access of administration facility of the cloud provider. So in a case like this, the username and password to a portal such as Microsoft is literally obtained in the attacker, and that reuse the administration facilities in a case like this, and there is clearly a fault on a behalf of a person who owns the account and take the risk of that account by taking and use the credentials. Another possible attack is someone like session hijacking. Now this is a quite a different, because what we are talking about here is and what would happen to boil down a flaw in the administration facility software. So for an example, if they weren't flagging their cookies as SCP only, and they had a reflected cross-site scripting vulnerability, and an attacker was able to convince the victim to follow a link, and that link we could have access of a session hijacking. And we talked about this and previously with likes of ethical hijacking and session hijacking, and that goes through many of the different ways that can happen. The reason why I have included it here is that the demonstrate that the weakness in the administration facility itself, which leads to a compromise. And now this is important because it recognized that those with access to the portal could do anything, and ultimately these portal themselves are just more web software than any typical web vulnerabilities. The different risk again is exposed to keys, and what I would like to do here is actually give you an example of where this happened. Let me talk about in 2015 a web developer accidentally made it to get half respiratory in public. The background is that the Visual Studio 25 behaved in an unexpected fashion when he attempted to create the when he created the repository, but be able to do that as it may, he ended up with the repository going public, and the repository include an AWS case, and that key was very quickly stolen by someone monitoring GitHub for public repositories and used to provision resources that allow the attacker to mine the bitcoins there very quickly. So he saw this bill run up to $6,500 within the hour, which speaks to the previous point I just showed you in terms of how easy it is to provision, and very extensive resources of all this possible because of this AWS administration facilities, just like Microsoft Azure and just like so many other cloud provided dashboards sits out there facing the public. It is literally one keys or one set of credential away from an attacker having full control of it, so that the expose the keys. So let's go back and take a look at one more possible cause of administration facility compromise, and the final one is social engineering. So this is another topic I talked about previously, is ethical hijacking or social engineering, and in there I talked about many of the different ways that valuable pieces of information can be extracted from targets, and the contents of gaining access to an administration facility. That target could be the individual whose account and attacks wants access to, but it also could be someone of a support side of the cloud itself. So let's move on, take a better look at the social engineering, because in the context of administration facilities of cloud service, it is a really important topic to be aware of.
So we logged into our DBWA web page using a admin username and password as password to get access this DBWS web server. So let's go and set up or create a database just to make sure everything is working. So you can go set up and then create or reset your database. So I have already done that. So my database is already resetted. So now what we have to do is we have to turn our DBWA security as low, because we will use low security so that we can try a few different types of attack. So the first one is going to be a cross-site scripting or XSS reflected attack. So I am using on my Kali Linux as and Firefox in this machine. So let's see how the script works. So if I say my name like Akash, then submit, I can see that first of all it does a couple of things. It says hello Akash, and because I am using low security, not only it reflects on the screen just to print whatever I type, it also include in the URL, as you can see. So it named in here. So what I said my name is like another one, which is Tanjum. So if I say my name Tanjim in here, let's see what it does. As you can see, it also printed my name in screen. So as you can see, I have already tapped a script down here. So I'm just going to use a script, which is a very simple script, which is this one, which is a very simple script. So in here I am keeping it as blank, so it will print and show as blank, and it will show a pop-up also. So let's run the script. As you can see, it shows nothing in here because the brackets had been blank. So if I say something like your site has been hacked in those blanks brackets, so let's see what it does. As you can see, it also shows as a pop-up that, and also got notified that your site has been hacked. Because it actually ran this script, and I put like a text inside of this script, which is, as you can see, this text or this show up in here whenever you run this in our reflected XSS screen. So whatever we put in those brackets will be printed and show you as a pop-up every time you run the script. So let's test out this on our XSS store. So you can do whatever you like to name in here. You have to put a name, like let's name nothing as a random, and let's put the same text that we put in our reflected XSS. So let's put in here and sign the guest book, and as you can see, you have been hacked. But the thing is, it just not only loaded in, so every time you load this page it will show up. As you can see, every time it will show up, even not only from this machine, it will show up even from another machine. So as you can see, I am currently on, this is my, so let's first log out. So this is my Ubuntu machine, so this is another machine. So let's log in again and go to accessory store. As you can see, so every time anyone or any person visit this page, this will load up. So everything you did in those script will show up in here, in every other machine. Even anyone with that page can show up this. So every person that visit this page will show up this message or the script that you run on this text field. So we're saying all of this because it's stored my script in this page. That's why it's every time I come to this page, it will load up this script and it will show up this message. So instead of putting a comment every time I come this page, so there is a pretty simple example here is just one simple script that you can insert that really a complex script in here that pop up as a fake or virus. So you can pick a script that will save as a virus or any payload. You can simply just run this, and every time any person will visit this page, then they will be affected with that payload. So that's how this XSS is stored and XSS cross-site vulnerability works. So it's all about your script, how or what script you load in this text field. So it will work on any script you want. Like if you have a script like this, so if you want to if you don't want to just show this text box, you can just simply use windows dot location. So what this will does is it will simply, after loading this page, because this is already saved in our database, so after loading this it will simply go to this website. So sometimes we see in other or any websites that we visit that sometimes when you click a website, it simply or randomly open another website. That's because they use a script with that page similarly like this, that will simply go to the specific website that we typed in here. So simply this will redirect this web address that someone or some person put on their script. So that's how this actual XSS script works. So unfortunately, we can do even more complicated things besides just alert and with another just window.location, and we can actually set people up for hacking through a company's web page or website. An easy way in PHP to protect against this is to strip the tags so that no one can interact directly to the web page. We'll talk more about that in our next lectures to see how this SQL injection examples works. So SQL injection and SQL injection blind we'll be seeing in our next lectures. So in this lecture we're going to learn about social engineering. So this is one of the most powerful tools for breaking into any computer system or network, and it is one of the most important technique that you need to be able to understand to block this kind of attacks, whether this is coming from a computer hacker or from an attacker on the outside or on the inside of your organization. So whether it's coming from a con artist out in real life or predator either online or in the real world, you need to understand these types of technique that social engineer attacker use so that you can keep yourself safe both online and in the real world. So the number one types of online social engineering attack is phishing, because it's the most prevalent and because it's one of the most engaging phishing. So this is a phishing with the PH. So it's the number one attack because it's so easy to do with so many people. So if you ever gotten with a phishing email before, it looks like it comes from someone official like your bank, your employer, your school, your friend, and maybe even with your family member, and it looks like an email asking you to log in and check on the account activity or to check in to help a friend out who is someplace somewhere else and traveling in the world. So for example, it looks like it's coming from you, that someone that you recognized and that you do business with you, and business that you do business with eBay, so or your PayPal account. But when it comes to phishing, they are just trying to get your credential, your username and your password to hack into your account. And unfortunately, phishing is number one because it is very, very effective. You won't even realize unless you faced one to see how effective it is. Everybody that this isn't just something that people do because they are done, is because we all get distracted at some point and we all get like some kind of social engineering techniques that we faced. So that's why it's really important to understand how this happens. Well, phishing is just sending an email and trying to get you to click through a link or to give you up information that you have, but it is based on some other social engineering techniques, and these all work together in a really effective way. Pretesting is the first of those, which is pretending to be someone that you are not, or setting up a false pretext or false situation. So you say like you are calling from a corporate or you're calling from a computer support. So you say that this is an email from a friend which is in trouble. So they are traveling somewhere that they need some money and they aren't able to pay their hotel bill, or they got arrested and they need to access to a lawyer. So there are a lot of pretexts that people use both online and in the real world in our phones. And the predator might say that I am your friend's dad, I am your friends of your mom's, and you have to understand and you have to talk to your kids and talk to your family members, friends about social engineering in both online and real world. So we would say that they would say like they are in your class and they are also in the same grade as you are, or they work in the same company that you are working and also have same kind of jobs. So pretesting just means using some false information and that may have some information to try to make a connection with the user. So we'll see in phishing emails, you will see that in other online and real attack. So a great example is someone leaves a USB drive in the parking lot of your company, and the natural thing for to do is ultimately pick that up and drive and plug it so that they might be able to use it. But unfortunately, if they are put malware on there, so it may just attack your network from the inside and intentionally, so you didn't know all of those. So sometimes that click can take you to a website, is this baiting? So that is compromised is a common social engineering technique. This means that you will get a little something. So if you do something for me, they will do something similar like this. So an example of this is like the Nigerian prince email scam. You may have heard or may not, which is a terrific example of this. So the email was like, if you help us to get this money or out of this country, then we'll send you some portion of it or you'll get some portion of it. So this is simple as this. So if you will do this for me, I will send you some information, I will give you some money, similar like this. So this is what quid pro quo makes these types of attacks. So just means that something for something else. So another common attack is tailgating, so which can be happen both online and also real world. So the most common way was the tailgating is to use the stand outside of the building of your some employees, maybe in the smoke break zone, and then when they go back to your work, and after you struck up a few conversation and you just follow one of them, or they come in holding a package in the hand and wait until someone comes to the door and you walk in right behind them, and it allows you to gain access to a building. So you have seen this in like movies and in television crime shows before. Tailgating is a real thing. So in real life it can give someone access to the computers in your network in your physical premise. So as we saw back in our like previous lectures, physical access can mean like total access. So if someone can touch your computer, they may be able to get all of your information, and they can get your network and all of those. So the next example is phishing. So phishing is a voice from efficient. So someone makes a phone call and pretends to be someone that they are not, like company IT support. So you'll see this in like phishing SMS. So that's where someone sends you a simple message or service or a text message pretending to be your bank, or pretending to be your employee, or like pretending to be an attorney presented in the IRS. So they will leave your message and they will call you up on your phone so that they can even fake. So the caller ID number of your telephone can make you believe that it is really a call from like government agency. So you have to be very careful not to give out any information. Remember, the IRS does not call most law enforcement agencies. Don't make phone calls. They don't do. So they either send certified mail if it's the IRS, or they will come in person. So if it's really law enforcement, they will just use this either calling from. So they won't do the calling thing. And the last part is spear phishing. So we are going to create a spear phishing, but not just a phishing attack, a spear phishing attack, and we are going to customize a fake phishing email for a particular individual or a group of individuals. So spear phishing is where you use some special information about the person that you try to get to a particular individual's information. Sometimes we call this whale phishing, when we are going to be to the person or to the organization. So great example of this is like spear phishing that was in the Democratic National Convention that was hacked in the United States during the 2016 election cycle, and there were just a couple of keys, administrative account key users, who fell for it. But it's not simple, but relatively sophisticated phishing attack. Like we are going to see how to build and how they unfortunately unwillingly gave access to outside attackers. So spear phishing are real techniques. All of those are real things. We need to know about this and talk about this with our families, friends, and with our employees, so that they understand this better, so that we all can avoid falling for these social engineering types of attack. So usually this comes with some sense of urgency. So someone who will work in the pretext that you have helped me to get this tomorrow. So you need to do this before the end of the day. So somebody hacked into your account, you need to take care of it right now. You got to be able to understand this technique so that you can recognize the sign of phishing attack, and then so that you can avoid being infected.
The Trojan horse is a classical tale of subterfuge and social engineering, and this is a tale that dates all the way back to the Trojan War many thousands of years ago, somewhere around 1188 BC by estimates. As the tale goes, after a fruitfulness of 10 years in which the Greeks were attacking the city of Troy, they ultimately construct a wooden horse and filled it with a force of soldiers, after which the Greeks left the horse as an offering for the city. The Greek then pretended to sail away, and the Trojan retrieved the horse dragging it into the world of fortress as a symbol of their victory. But as night fell, the men emerged from the Trojan horse, and the Greeks sailed back under the cover of night and consequently conquered the city, decisively ending the war. It was a trick, and the Greek had fought the Trojans into thinking that they were making a good, which will uh, make the token of defeat, and yet all while having an ulterior motive and relying on the Trojan, letting their guard down and being foolish enough to think that they had indeed won the war. This is an social engineering pattern that you are going to see multiple times throughout this lesson. The attacker being the Greek falling the victim Trojan into believing the gesture they made, letting their guard down, becoming relaxed and feeling as they are in control when the victim was at their most unprepared, and true intent behind the Greek gesture and became clear, and the rest is now history. We will see many similar examples of manipulating people into performing action that they wouldn't otherwise have done had they used their better judgment simply by clever and social engineering. So let's move on and clearly define this and talk about why social engineering is the soft center within so many of our information system. How can an attacker convince people to do something that they would not? So, one of the most commonly exploited human weaknesses in social engineering is greed. Offer people something that they want, and let me give you an example. You have almost certainly received email like this, and certainly one of the most common exposures that you have social engineering is by phishing email. So in this case, the attacker is prying on the greed of the victim, and this is why we see an offer of, like as an example, $4.5 million or $1,000 million. There are the 10 of thousands of variants of this very same email, like, hey, I've got a heap of money, I would like to try and give you more, and just I need a couple of bit information from you, and of course the information being requested down here. Well, then after the further questions, and ultimately the attacker socially engineering and personally identifiable data out of the victim, and many times these emails also lead to an attack at social engineering, and which directly take out the victim, both of which are obviously quite attractive to the social engineer. So greed is a human weakness that makes us all vulnerable. Another weakness is fear. If we can frighten out the victim into acting in a way that they wouldn't normally do, so that can give the social engineer an upside. So here is a good example. So this is an extortion emails that followed after the Patreon data, which breached in 2015. In here, the attacker is relying entirely on the fear of the victim, and they are doing that by saying that they have a sensitive personal information about the victim, and if money is not paid, they are going to leak the information online, which would damage the credit source. If the victim is fearful enough about this happening, they may act irrationally and actually pay the ransom. Now in this case the data leaked out of the Patreon system and was actually which was actually very well encrypted. It's highly unlikely that the attacker could actually do anything with it, but that doesn't matter. All that matter is that the attacker against the is scared that the victim enough that they can convince and they need to pay the ransom. And there is another weakness being paid on down towards the bottom, and is one of these that has a time limit. There is urgency implied in this email, like act within 48 hours or 24 hours or your data going to be leaked, which brings me to the next human weakness, which is urgency. So urgency is when people feel that they are under pressure to perform an action within a given period of time. They will act irrationally, and this is how many information that you can see on the TV or cat. Now in order to get your discount of a valid only for the next $20, the next 2 hours or whatever, the social engineer can use to convince the target that this is urgency. And make no mistake, a lot of marketing in social engineering as well is using this technique. But let me give you an example within information security of urgency as a weapon of the social engineer. So also in 2015 we saw this story about how John Bremen, the director of the CIA, had his personal email hacked. Now in this case the attacker was socially engineered the Verizon, his telecom provider, and that social engineer pretended to be an employer of the Verizon, and he called up the company and said, hey, my tools are down, I am trying to fix something urgently and I cannot get access. Can you just give me a little bit information about the director of CIA and then I will be able to fix the problem. So the attacker implied urgency in this order to get the Verizon worker to behave in a way, and that was almost certainly against their better. So another human weakness we often see exploited in social engineering attacks is curiosity. This saying goes, the curiosity kills the cat, and it's the same behavior that gets human into trouble when they are being socially engineered. For example, this Facebook post, it's a classic clickjacking scam. I saw this appear in my timeline because a friend of mine had liked this link, so it was out of character for them. So I did some further investigation, and what's happening here is that we have got a story that makes people curious. We often see these types of bait, so and headlines that people take curiosity and check that, and you will see things like you wouldn't believe and what happened next or try. So this one trick, something that makes people curious enough to click though. So in this particular case, if you click though, you try to play the video to see what they are actually doing it. Usually the click checking vulnerabilities within Facebook to cause you to like the post, and of course once you like the post on Facebook, your friends and that you like the post, your friends are gonna see that and they will look into it, and then their friends see that they have liked this post and the whole thing propagates. Even one of my friends fell for this one, and I don't think is that she was actually genuinely interested in this content of story, but she was curious, and curiosity will get people to do all sorts of things that wouldn't. normally do another human weakness is sympathy. Now we might not often think of sympathy of being a weakness, but it is a behavior that can be exploited, like social engineer. Let me give you an example. This is one variation of a scam that been going on for a very long time. Now sometimes this is referred to as a grandma or imposter scam, and it tells stories of a misfortune in order to get recipient of the email to feel sympathetic to the sender, where they were marked as the part of the hotel where they stayed, and then of course they just need a little bit money of hell and they'll get back on their feet and they'll send that money, and which will never happen. So back to the victim allegedly, of course that doesn't actually happen. We have seen a various of this scam, either sent as a random spam or sent to everyone in the address book of a compromised email account. So if you saw this coming from someone, you know that you thought they are in a trouble, so you would feel sympathetic, which would get possibly cause you to follow the instruction precisely here and send the money. Quite possibly, certainly, this has had successful at that, and it has continually to run along the time. So sympathy, as such as we often think of it is a positive attitude, can cause and can be used as for evil. So another one is respect for authority. Is one that you are going to see a lot throughout the remainder of this, because when someone believes somebody else in a position of authority, and particularly position that commands a degree of respect, the victim is likely to behave in a way they wouldn't normally do. So for as an example, if the victim believes that they are talking to their boss for even perhaps the CEO of the company, they are going to behave in a way they wouldn't normally do with someone. They didn't have the same level of respect for her. So let me give you an example of the respect for authority. This is a scam allegedly run by Australian Federation Police, and it's a speeding fine scam. So this is not a legitimate. The AFP doesn't send traffic infringement notice via email in this fashion. In fact, if you did click through this, your machine may have infected with ransomware. So definitely not the outcome the victim were expecting and attack. Like this is a successful because someone can be convinced that they are talking to the police, so they are going to show a level of respect and they wouldn't otherwise have shown. Now in this case, it's not only the authority figure sending the message, but they are also applying urgency, which is what we just saw before. So often these days attacks will use multiple behaviors or exploit multiple weaknesses of people. So in order to achieve the social engineering objective helpfulness, in another word, one of those behavior that we probably don't normally think of as a weakness is a positive attribute, and you would like the people of helpful, but this can also be a weakness if the socially engineer can leverage the helpful nature of an individual to their advantage, and they can often obtain information and that they never would have otherwise have been able to get their hands on. So let me give you a perfect example of this. In 2003, the whistleblower Edward Snowden, which is a huge number of confidential documents from the NSA, and part of that made him the attack successful was that he was able to socially engineer his co-workers into providing their credential allegedly. and he persuaded between 20 to 25 coworkers to give him their username and password by convincing them. So he needed them to do his job as a computer system administrator. This is simply preying on a helpful nature of his colleagues. Their intentions were no doubt good. They wanted to help their fellow workers achieve their job, but of course, as we know, Snowden used that information to access a huge amount of data that he shouldn't have access, and which successfully socially engineered those colleagues by exploiting the human weaknesses, which was helpfulness. So that's a bunch of weaknesses that we all have used in various ways to mount social engineering attacks. As we progress to the remainder of this and we'll refer back to these weaknesses, and we'll look at precisely and what it was about the victim that the attacker exploited in order to make their socially engineering attack successful. So let's now move on and take a look at a couple of different types of social engineering attacks. Let's start with a really clear definition of psychological manipulation. So think about the Trojan story that I just told previously. So which is about the Greek tricking the Trojan into believing that they had the upper hand and consequently causing people to perform action or divulge confidential information that they wouldn't otherwise do. That's really the heart of it. That's the objective. The social engineering aspect is just the road to get there. Now we often talk about the people being the soft center of the systems. So let me show you what I mean by that. Have to think about the security control within the system. So you can use and indeed the systems that many of you build. So for example, we have security controls such as firewalls. We have firewalls and server environments, firewalls and desktop dedicated firewall devices. We spend a huge amount of time on firewalls, and they are a very good product too, a very necessary product, I would say. And they form part of the hard shell around many of the information systems that we use, and a tasker has to penetrate the firewall in order to gain access to the system within another hard shell around. Their information system is access control. We want to have very robust authorization rules around who can access what, and what this is digital security. And unless you are an authorized identity, you simply cannot get access to the resources you are requesting. And then again, also great, we are made robust, strong access controls, and we implement them at the system level. Another example again is antivirus, that we probably all know about it. This is crucial part of protecting systems. Antivirus tools understand what the typical malicious software pattern looks like, and their ability to identify malicious software before it will able to damage the system or take control of your data or dislocate. The dislocate this information is obviously really important, and the antivirus form as important part of the information security of both home and corporate environment. In fact, all three of these things are staples of our digital security. These are the default security controls on so many of the systems that we use and build. But here the thing about the social engineering behind these controls within the hard shell, and that they will provide us with the vulnerable humans, the people who sits within the firewall and who have access to the files which we would otherwise protect, and with the protection of access controls, and who have the ability to run software on those environment, potentially circumventing antivirus controls. People have a huge amount of power. Well and truly, after all those hard shell protection have been applied, and what we are really going to look at during this is how can we vulnerable human be exploited to circumvent the hard security controls that you see in this slide. So in this it's this paradox, this is led to the social engineering to often be described as the soft center with the hard shell, and in fact you sometimes see it being referred as the M&M problem. The crunchy hard out of the protects that soft chocolate inside, and that's really the social engineering example. Again, those hard outer and the security controls, but us weak vulnerable human inside. And what it means that we get left with situation like this. So this is a quote from the Kevin Mitnick, who probably the most infamous computer hacker of all time. So Kevin became particularly notorious in the early 90s, breaking into the numerous system and frequently doing so using social engineering, as Kevin says here. Even very well protected companies, and the company is protected with a good digital security, can be bought undone just by one trusted person within the company. That's all it takes. One vulnerable person in the soft center who can simply social engineer by an attacker and render all that, and the good money spent on the digital security is absolutely then useless. This is precisely what we are going to look throughout this remainder of this lesson. So how can human be engineered in order to circumvent those otherwise very good security controls? So let's move on now and start taking a look at some of the human weaknesses that make all this possible. We all get exposed to some of the degree of social engineering every day. I mentioned before that every time you see an advertisement, there is a degree of social engineering and psychological manipulation to get to you to do something that you may not otherwise have done. If you are a parent, you want, most certainly you see this every day, I guess, from kids, and then they become very adept of knowing when to look sad or depressed, or how to appeal to sympathies, and what weakness as a parents are, what might be the things they could get to do in order to give them an advantage. Crying is the perfect one. Can I make daddy feel sorry for me? Will he possibly cave in and buy me that toy, or let me watch the TV show, or let me play the games? They may not be overly sophisticated, so engineers that kids sure do get a lot of practice at it. Another place you regularly see social engineering is in the movies. So for example, in the 2003 version of the Italian Job with Mark Wahlberg, there is a great social engineering scene where they want to gain access to a victim's house. So they disconnect his cable TV. He calls up and books a repairman who cannot arrive for a couple of days. So the social engineer calls back and says, "Hey, we have got a spot available today. Would you be happy to let them into your house?" The cable repair person then turns up, and all the victim can do is to verify the identity that the person is and look for a forged badge. That's all. Now they have access. But if you are really interested in social engineering and the popular culture, this movie is, I guess, explained it all. So another one is Catch Me If You Can. This is the 2002 screen adaptation of the true story of Frank Abanga. So this is a really worthwhile watching because it's full social engineering examples, courtesy of a legend like Leonardo DiCaprio, who plays the real character in this movie. His character is a conman who builds trust and confidence with his victim by being a charming before having them perform an action. So which action they really should not do. For an example, he poses as a pilot because pilots have an era of authority, incredibility about them above and beyond someone in. So say just a normal sweet victims are distracted by the authority and his charming nature, that he is able to engage with them and ask them question about things like how checks are created and processed. And he is often speaking to a young woman in a bank who gets distracted by that charm and disclose information which they shouldn't otherwise do. So when you watch the movie, you will be see that as a social engineer, he is always confident and assertive. Even though he is grilled by FBI, his conviction are firm. So he is exactly what he is doing, and confidence become part of the character. Even the FBI gets fooled by him. So if you want to get example of a social engineering looks like, and some of the weaknesses that we saw earlier on are exploited, go and check this out. So this is the must if you are interested in this. Catch Me If You Can, the best example that I can give you. So we'll also go through a real life social engineering attack that someone attempt to mount against me. So we are going to able to break that down, analyze and extract the technique that the scammer in that case tried to use. So that's all for the introductory. That's all for the introductory about this social engineering. You will often see social engineering broken down into two categories. One is computer based and another is human based. So let me give you some of the example of each one of them. A phishing email, for example, is a computer based attack. This email is sent by electronically and someone reads it in their email program and interacts with the attacker entirely over the internet. This is not the attacker that physically interacts with the victim or even talking to the victim. It's all done by the computer. Same again for the malicious software updates. So this is sort of a thing you will see from an infected website where you browse to the website and will say, hey, your antivirus or your Windows operating system or something else about that machine you are using is out of date, as you see in many websites when you visit and see ads like this. So just download this one piece of software and well update it for you. That's the computer based. It's something that the victim sees their screen in front of them. Same again with viral hoaxes. For an example, we just saw the Facebook one previously with the title, and that said she did that in the public high school every day, and that goes viral. People get very curious about these types of posts and ads. They click on the link and now they propagating the hoax. But like the other two, it is also computer based and social engineering. And again, all that victim is doing is simply just interacting with their machine. Now let's move into the human based social engineering, and a good example of this impersonation is what we saw the director CIA example. Before the attacker is actually called up the Verizon and they are talking to the victim, And in this case, Verizon was also the victim of the social engineering scam, and also attacker talking to them, and there is a conversation, and there is a backwards and forwards. It's a very different style of attack to something appearing in emails and being sent electronically shoulder. So the shoulder surfing is another good example. This is when the quote and unquote attacker is looking over the shoulder of the victim, so they might observe the password that the victim is typing into their machine. This is socially, and they are still there to face or face to back, as it may say, but the point is it's something that happens in person. Same again with delegating. So this is the process of the attacker following the victim through and otherwise secured the door. So picture an environment was swept cars or transients where you have to identify yourself before. And moving through the gateway, if an attacker can simply latch on the back of someone else metaphorically, so mind you that they just can follow the individual through, and then they can gain access to a physical environment that they shouldn't have access to. And again, it's all in person, so it's a human based social engineering attack. So we process through this course when you are going to see many examples of both purely computer based social engineering where the attacker is simply communicated digitally, and human based engineering where the attacker actually has to engage with the victims. So the definition as we move through there, so let's go and take a look at the prevention items. So nowadays many tools and techniques are designed to forestall social engineering attacks like victimization. These tools build the organization less vulnerable, and the little giant which shall there are presently 3 ways to ordinarily instruct to defend against the social engineering attacks. And education, coaches and awareness, and policies and social control through auditing. And organization staffs or people are often educated through the coaching and awarenesses, which may build them a lot of reluctance of disclose personal info. Full security coaches of the workers ought to be conducted. This reduces the chance of a social engineering attack and make the organization less valuable. Policies ought to be created that provides the direction to the workers on correcting handling of the computers and countries or personal info or user knowledge. Audit should be conducted so as to confirm that the workers of the organization are following the policies and procedures. A copies of structure, knowledge, records or personal info should be destroyed before being discarded. Common effective ways to destroying text into embody and shredders and fireboxes. Staff and people ought to be trained to question the credential of the one who is asking himself to be the authoritative position on this organization. And here are some of the preventing measures. Use different login for each service and secure your password. Use the two-factor authentication all the time, and be sure to use the credit card wisely and safely. Frequently monitor your accounts and personal data, and never put your personal data into the unverified or unknown websites, and it's better to remove your information from the public information database.
Hey everyone, let's do how can you guys install Veil on Kali Linux. I have been notified that there are problems using Veil framework in Kali Linux, the apt get install command from the creators. So you guys find it on GitHub and git clone. This will clone Veil into the Veil Aviation directory. When done, changes to the Veil Aviation setup directory and run.setup.sh. apt get update. apt get install Veil, and successfully it completed the process. Now give command Veil remote enumerating objects done, and receiving objects now. I have been notified that there are problems installing Veil framework AV bypass in Kali using the apt get install command. From the creator's website, it looks like the recommended install is to now clone Veil from the GitHub repository and then run the step I show. Veil is a tool designed to generate Metasploit payloads that bypass common antivirus solutions. It replaces the package Veil evasion. There are three ways to install Veil on Kali Linux. We can use apt-get, apt, and apt-itude. As it is a collection of tools designed for use during penetration testing. It currently consists of the following modules like Veil Evasion, a tool to generate antivirus evading payloads using a variety of techniques and languages; Veil Catapult, a PSEX style payload delivery system that integrates Veil Evasion; and Veil PowerView, a PowerShell tool to gain network situational awareness or Windows domains; Veil PLAG, a modular most exploitation framework that integrates Veil Evasion. And some requirements for this, like to install the Veil framework, you are supposed to configure the latest Python packages into your machine. And how to install, the important point to remember is that the installation must be done with super user privileges. If you are not using the root account as default with Kali Linux, prepaint commands with sudo change to the root user before beginning the Veil framework is a fantastic tool for avoiding payload detection by the antivirus software. To install it, you first need to download it from GitHub. Now downloading Python, latest Python. And to generate payload, there are some command like select the operation evaluation from the list as to generate the payload. A finished Python dependencies installation and initializing Ruby installation, installing Ruby and dependencies. Wine, all the dependencies must have to be downloaded to use Veil. Veil allocate memory with RWX read, write and execute permissions to write shellcode into and execute it. Write the shellcode to the previously allocated memory. Created thread to execute the shellcode. Now open file system. Python program, copy it, paste it here. Now updating. Here available tools, evasion, ardence, available commands, exit info. Samirur. Can't find the wine profile for audit version 3. However, RWX isn't entirely normal and could potentially be seen as malicious by antivirus sandbox engines. After talking with Casey about this, I decided to change how Whale injects shellcode into memory. And latest Whale 3.1 will now allocate memory with RW permissions. Give command nano test. Now open the dashboard GNU nano and installed Veil. Type Veil, generate and configure our payload or backdoor. Veil will now allocate memory with RW permissions to enable the stager to write shellcode into the allocated memory. After writing the shellcode to the allocated memory, the stager will call virtual protect to change the memory permissions from RW to RX. At this point, the stager will continue on to call create thread and wait for single object as normal. Simple code of this can be seen. It's something like test bit against several antiviruses and attack and gain access to the Windows machine. So this is how you guys can use Veil.
So now that we have well loaded, as you can see, it is the main command that you can use it with well. So the first command you can do is to exit. So you can do get info list and all of those available tools. You also need to do the update, because this is very important, because you always want to be up to date when it comes to bypassing the antivirus program, and you can use this as a tool. Okay, let's now start using our validation, and as you can do it, it's going to become very easy and you will be able to understand it. So there are main two tools, which is these two. So we have the first one, which is evasion, and second one, which is ordnance. So this tool generates a payload that used by evasion. So you can look at this as a helper for secondary tool. Now what I mean by payload is that payload is the part of a code, that a backdoor that does the stuff that what we want. So that does the evil stuff, if you want to say. So is the part of the code that gives us a reverse connection. So it's the part of the code that download and execute something on that target computer, and is the part of the code that allow us to achieve what we want to execute that file. And this is going to become more clear when we start to using this whale. Now for now we are interested in evasion. So we are going to just type use one, because one is evasion. So the first thing what we need to do is we need to list all of those payloads, available payloads, into this evasion menu. So just type list, simple, and you can see there's 41 payloads, different payloads in here, and all of those payloads follow a certain naming program pattern. So as you can see, for example, let's use this one. So because that's the payload that I'm going to be using, and you can see that the payload is divided in three parts: first part, second part, and third part. So the first part right here is this. So this refers to the program and the language. So that's the payload is going to be wrapped in. So we have the EBIL code, and EBIL code is going to be wrapped into a certain programming language that the target computer understands. And right here, as you can see, this payload uses the Go program. So we can see many of these payload using different programs like C, CS, Go, PowerShell, Python, and Ruby. So now let's talk about the second part, which is metapletter. This is really important, because this is the type of the payload and the type of the code that's going to be executed on the target computer. In example, which is a payload. So this payload is designed by Metasploit, because this is a huge framework for hacking and it allows you to do a lot of things. But in this lecture, we're going to be focusing on creating a payload. And what's really cool about this interpreter is that it runs on the memory and it allows us to migrate between the system process. So we can have like payload or the backdoor running from a normal process like Explorer, for example, and this payload will allow us to gain full control over our target computer. So we'll be able to navigate through the file system, download and upload files, turn on the microphone, turn on the webcam, even use the computer to hack other computer itself, and install a keylogger, and you can literally do anything you can think of. And all of those will be running from a memory from a normal process on the system. So it's very hard to detect
and it doesn't leave a lot of footprint because it's really cool, and that's why we'll be using it a lot. And the third part of the name is the method that's going to be used to establish a connection. So in here you can see that is called rev https.py. So the rev stands for reverse and https is the protocol and is going to be used to establish a connection. So we can see that this payload will create a reverse https connection. So you can see this one right here, for example this one. So it creates a various HTTP connection, and we have this one that creates a reverse TCP connection. Now what I mean by reverse is that the connection is going to be come from the target computer to my own computer. So I want to connect it. I want to be connected to the computer that I want to hack, and what's going to happen is that once the person double click the backdoor will connect back to me and from the target computer, and that's cool because then I will be able to bypass antivirus program because the connection is not going to be detect computer that's coming back to my computer. So it's literally as if the target person is connected to a normal website, and I'm going to use a port of that website that uses like 80 or 8080. So again, if the person analyze the connection, it will look as if they are literally just connecting to a normal website. Also, if the target is computer is hidden behind a router or behind a network, again this is going to work because the connection is coming from the target computer to me instead of me connected to the target computer. So using a reverse connection is really handy, and I think this is really the only practical way of getting access to a computer because there is a lot of things that you can stop you from connecting a certain computer. Now this is the general naming pattern. You will see some payload like this, like in here, like this one. So what is going to do is going to payload that inject to your other payload and is going to click and create a normal payload, and the normal payload inject a detector payload. So for example, now it does this to try to bypass more security, and usually they want to bypass more things than the normal payload would bypass. So that's why I usually use one of the names for normal payload in here. And so this is it, that's all about the payloads. So I literally just wanted you to understand what those payload is, what the difference between this reverse and bind and TCP payload is. This way you can just understand and it will be more clear to you, and I can just use the payload that I want without explaining in our next lecture. So we are going to be generating a payload and we will be testing it against antivirus program. So guys, in this lecture we will be talking about how we can connect to a Windows machine using a generated backdoor, and how can you destroy a Windows machine, like use any command that you want using a payload. So as you can see, we have a connection to our backdoor and we created a backdoor and we set a payload, and we are listening for incoming connection here. From any connection that comes in here will be same port as port 8080 and will be on this machine, and we will be receiving here all of those inside in this computer. So what we are going to do now is we are going to test the backdoor to make sure that it works. And to do that, we're going to use a basic delivery method. So we're now going to be talking about a smart delivery method that will check the person to opening the file, and then we're going to send it to them. So for now, we're just going to do a very basic example how you can utilize
your payload to connect or get back to your Windows machine, just to test our very basic vector. So to do that, we are going to put the backdoor into our website server and then download the backdoor from the target computer. So there is nothing smart about this, and you probably cannot use this way to deliver the backdoor to a real person. So let's see how to send our backdoor and how to set up this. So first we have to start your Apache server, like service apache.start, and it will start your Apache server. Then your Apache server location is in here, var www.html. This is your Apache server location. So I created a folder and I sent it my backdoor that I created in here. So the backdoor we created, which is located in here. So let's see. So as you can see, this is the backdoor that we created. As you can see, 80801. So I just copy this in here because we need to send this file to our Windows machine. So what we need to do is we need to open our Apache server and go to our this location and then just download this file. So if we go to our Apache server and evil file folder, let's see what happens inside our Linux machine. Then we'll show you inside of our Windows machine. So let's see 192.103, then evil files, as you can see, and we are into our Apache machine, and you can just simply click and download this backdoor and then run the backdoor to make Windows machine connect to your hand. So let's open our Windows machine. So we will be attacking our Windows 7, which is our also virtual machine. So let's okay. So let's go to our Explorer because I don't have any browser currently installed in here. I just use this for penetration testing. So let's go to our Apache server 192.168 evil file. As you can see, we are right into our server, and you can simply, so first let's Windows firewall, let's disable our Windows security because this payload will be then deleted if we don't. Okay, let's download this file. Let's save as desktop. We started reverse handler on It should have worked. Okay. Okay, I think there is some problem in here. 192.168.103. Okay, let's try again and download. I typed some different things. Last time I did on HTTP, so I think that I did some mistake in here. So I solved it, and let's see. Let's download this file again. Save as desktop, save. Okay. Hell host online 2168 L port reverse HTTPS Windows metadata reverse.
Hello everyone. Let's talk about email spoofing. The email header is changed so that the message appears to have come from a friend or a legitimate company. Then it goes spoofed email from a friend containing an infected link, spoofed email from the CEO requiring sensitive company data, spoofed email from a vendor asking for banking credentials, or many other options, many other reasons. So social engineering toolkit uses SET is an open source penetration testing framework designed for social engineering, and it has a number of custom attack vectors that allow you to make a believable attack in a fraction of time. This kind of tools use human behaviors to trick them to the attack vectors. So in Kali Linux, open the terminal first. Give command if config, then clear set toolkit. To open set, go to applications, social engineering tools, click set engineering tool. It will ask you agree with the terms of usage, type Y as shown, And step 3, most of the menus down in the following. Screenshot. So go to terminal again. Enter social engineering and it will open, and enter button you will see the explanations for each submenu. The spear phishing modules allow you to specially craft email messages and send them to your targeted victims with attached file formatalious payloads. The spear phishing module allows you to specially craft email message and send them to your targeted victims. For example, sending malicious PDF document which if the victim opens, it will compromise the system. And if you want to spoof your email address, be sure sendmail is installed. apt get installed sendmail. Now open the web browser and go to this site temp-mail.org. Then paste it clipboard and your Gmail address. My Gmail address is here, goac5703@jozoey.com. Here is some configuration. There are two options for the spear phishing attack, like perform a mass mail attack and create a file format payload and a social engineering template. The first one is letting set do you everything for option 1. The second one is to create your own FileMate payload and use it in your own attack. Now enter the body of this message. How the message configuration is seen by the attacker. And paste it again in clipboard. Mass mailer attack will allow you to send multiple emails to victims and customize the messages. There are two options on the mass emailer. Like the first is to send an email to single email, and second address and email address mass mailer. So guys, let's talk about beef, BEEF. beef is short for the browser exploration framework. It is a penetration testing tool that focuses on the web browser. Amid growing concerns about web-borne attacks against clients, including mobile clients, Beep allows you to professional penetration tester to access the actual security posture of a target environment by using client-side attack vectors. Unlike other security frameworks, Beep looks past the 100 network perimeter and client system and examines exploitability within the context of the one open door. The web browser. Beep will hook one or more web browsers and use them as beachheads for launching detected command modules and further attacks against the system from within the browser context. This is the dashboard of Beef. Here is browser section. Here you can search anything, debug, exploits, IPC. All the option is here like Metasploit, social engineering, persistence, phone gap, network, IPC, host, Chrome extensions. This is module 3. And some dependencies like Ruby, JSON, RubyXJS, Ruby Evented Machine, and the command is Kali Linux in root and beef -xss -s and stop beef -xss -stop -s. People use browsers for all type of things, and in general we trust a lot of personal information to them. That's why browsers are a perfect attack surface for a hacker, because the target may not even know they are infected and feed you all the information you could want. To do this, you need to first trick the user into clicking a link to generate the link you can use called beef, which used to be pre-installed on Kali Linux, similar to Metasploit. Beef, which stands for Browser Exploration Framework, is a framework for launching attacks. Unlike with Metasploit, it's specific to launching attacks against web browsers. In some cases, we could use Beep in conjunction with Metasploit to start more advanced attack scenarios. And the tool was developed by a group of developers led by Wade Alcorn and built on the familiar Ruby on Rails platform. Beep was designed to explore the vulnerabilities in browsers and test them. In particular, Beep is an excellent platform for testing browsers vulnerability to cross-site scripting like XSS and other injection attacks. Beef can generate a link that can track the target, even run modules to both escalate permissions and gather more information about the persons like behind the computer, and it can even scan behind the network the person's on, like who is pretty expressive, since you can take pictures with their webcam, see what they're typing, and launch phishing pages to try and get credentials. And installing Beef is built right into Kali Linux, and older you shouldn't have to install anything if you're running one of those versions on your computer. Like in mid 2019, Kali removed Beef as a pre-installed explanation tool, moving it from Kali Linux default to the Kali Linux large meta packages. That means that if you installed a fresh version of Kali, you would no longer have Beep, so you may retain it if you simply updated your older version of Kali to 2019 or higher. So guys, that's it for today.
Payload that we created uses a reverse payload. So like I said before, it does not open a port in the target computer. It actually connects from the target computer to our computer, and by doing that it will bypass firewall and it will look less suspicious. So for this to work, we need to open a port on our computer. So what you need to do is you need to open our metapletter, which is metasploit. So just type msf console, then it will open our metasploit. So now so I'm going to use a metapletter framework. Now to use or run a metapletter deploy it, all you have to do is just msf console. So the method or the interpreter operator that will create it for us is actually programmed by the people who makes this exploit. So that's why we are using metasploit to listen for our incoming connections. So validation actually uses metasploit to generate the backdoor that we created in our previous lecture. So to listen for incoming connection, we are getting used to this module limiter. So what I said, what you have to do now is you have to use our this handler. So just type use exploit multi slash handler, then it will load this handler, which is in default is reverse TCP. So don't worry, we will use our reverse HTTPS. So just type option. As you can see, it uses generic reverse TCP. So what you have to do now is we have to change this to our previous reverse HTTPS that we created the payload, the same payload method. So simply what you have to do is change this module, change. So what you need to do is change this payload to this one. So just type set payload and it will change this payload to this one. So simple, just type payload and then again show options to check if this payload is changed or not. As you can see, it already changed to our reverse HTTPS payload. Then what you need to do is we need to, as usual as previously what we did, change our lhost and lport. So simple, set lhost to the IP address of our Kali machine or use this machine that you will be using, and as same set payload to 8080 that we previously set. As you can see, after that show option gives you all the updated results in here. Then after that simply type exploit, and as you can see it is generated and start to exploit in this machine and in this port. So what you have to do now is the file or the backdoor that we created previously, we need to send it to our Windows machine. So we have to go to this directory where your backdoor was created. So var, you have to go var lib val output compile. As you can see, this is our backdoor that we created last time. So just copy this, paste it to the Apache web server that was built in Kali machine, so which is in this directory www.html. So I created a folder, so I paste it in here. As you can see, this is our payload. So what you have to do now is you have to run our Apache server. Simple, just go to the directory. As you can see, this is our IP of our Kali machine and this is the directory of this folder. Just download it, and as you can see, my antivirus didn't even detect it and it was saved. So what you have to do now is you have to just open this file. So just press open, more info, run anyway. So let's try to download again. I changed the sleep time so that, so as you can see, it already run, and as you can see, it didn't even recognize and it run. So you see the target machine it connected and it is working. So now we have a basic full control over that computer, this computer right here, and we have a like material session, and then the interpreter will allow us to do anything and literally anything that the user have and you can do on this computer, which is the Windows 10 in our virtual machine. So that's how this payload works using this reverse HTTP payload.